Welcome back to Sleep Theories. Before we go down into tonight's story, we want to say a quick thank you to Biblically Accurate who suggested tonight's story. We love when you guys decide to suggest your ideas, so make sure to drop them in the comments below. And while you are down there in the comments, tell us where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It has become one of our favourite things about this community. Somebody is listening at 11 at night in Ohio. Somebody is listening at 4 in the morning in Manchester. Somebody is on a night shift in Perth, or driving a truck across Alberta, or lying in the dark in Manila watching the ceiling fan turn. We love seeing how far this reaches, and it is oddly comforting to know that while you are lying there in the quiet, thousands of other people are lying in their own quiet at the exact same moment, listening to the exact same voice. Now let's begin. There is a particular kind of nothing in West Texas. It is not the nothing of a forest at night, which is full of small movements and small lives. It is not the nothing of the ocean, which is always breathing. It is a flat, dry, honest nothing. A hard pan, plain the colour of old bones, stretching to a horizon that never seems to get closer, dotted with mesquite and creosote, and the occasional rusted windmill turning in air that smells faintly of dust and diesel and hot metal. In summer, the heat comes off the ground in visible sheets. In winter, the wind arrives from the northwest with nothing in its way for 400 miles, and it goes through canvas, through denim, through the doors of trailers, through everything. The men who worked the Permian Basin in the early 1970s understood that landscape the way sailors understand water. They did not find it beautiful. They found it familiar, which is a deeper thing. They knew which roads flooded in a hard rain and which ones washed out entirely. They knew the diners in Odessa and Midland and Monaghan's that stayed open all night for crews coming off tower. They knew the particular ache that settles into the lower back after 12 hours on a drilling floor, and the way a cold beer tastes when your hands still smell like drilling mud. And they knew rock. That is the thing that gets lost when this story is told badly. These were not superstitious men. They were technicians. They spent their working lives listening to stone through a steel string a mile long, reading the vibration in the drill pipe the way a doctor reads a pulse, and they could tell you from feel alone when the bit had passed from shale into limestone, from limestone into dolomite, from dolomite into the salt beds that lie under that country like the memory of a sea that dried up before anything with a spine existed to see it. The Permian Basin is, in the most literal sense, a graveyard of an ocean. 250 million years ago it was a shallow warm sea ringed with reefs, crawling with creatures that have no living descendants. When the water withdrew, it left everything behind, layer on layer, pressed down and cooked and folded into the rock. Every barrel of oil that has ever come out of that ground is the compressed remains of something that once swam. The men on the drilling floor did not think about that very often, but they knew it. It sat somewhere at the back of the mind, the knowledge that they were pulling wealth out of a mass grave so old that the word old stopped meaning anything. Wesley Arnett was 38 years old in the autumn of 1973, and he had been a drilling supervisor for 6 of those years. He was not a remarkable man. He was careful, which in that industry was the same as being good. He kept his logs in pencil in a spiral notebook, because pens froze and smeared and lied, and he wrote in small, tidy capitals, and he checked his numbers twice. He had a wife named Dolores who taught 4th grade, and a daughter who was 7, and had decided that year that she would be a veterinarian, and a house in Odessa with a swamp cooler that rattled. He would be dead of a heart attack within 4 years at 42, in a parking lot outside a hardware store. He never told anyone what happened at the site. Not his wife, not his priest, not the men from Washington who came back a second time with a different set of forms. The well was an exploratory hole in a section of country so unremarkable that the lease had changed hands 3 times without anyone bothering to visit it. The geology suggested a modest structure at depth. Nobody expected a fortune. Nobody expected anything at all, really. It was the sort of well you drill because the lease terms require you to drill something. and everyone involved was already thinking about the next one. They spudded in on a Tuesday. The first several thousand feet went exactly the way the map said they would. Arnett wrote his neat capitals in his notebook and drank coffee that tasted like the inside of a thermos and watched the pipe go down. It was on the fourth day, a little after 2 a.m, that the drill stopped feeling like it was drilling. The best description any of them ever gave was that the bit fell through a door. There was resistance, the ordinary heavy grinding resistance of a bit chewing rock, and then there was not. The weight on the bit dropped away. The rotary table, which had been labouring, spun free. The whole string seemed to sag downward into nothing at all, the way a foot goes through a rotten stair. Arnett had seen bit loss before. He had seen washouts and twist-offs and lost circulation zones where the drilling mud vanishes into a cavity and never comes back. He knew the sound of a cavern. This was that at first. A driller named Ruiz said the word cave, and somebody else said cast, and for perhaps 90 seconds the entire crew was engaged in a very ordinary professional problem. Then the returns came up. Drilling mud comes back to the surface carrying cuttings, small chips of whatever the bit is currently eating, and every man on that floor had seen 10,000 samples of pulverised rock come up through the shale shaker. What came up that night was not rock. It was red. Not the rust red of iron-stained sandstone, not the brown red of clay. It was a deep saturated red, glossy under the work lights, and it came up thick, and it came up warm. Ruiz put a gloved hand into it and lifted a fistful, and it held its shape. It clung. It stretched between his fingers in strands. There was a smell that nobody could place and everybody hated instantly. Faintly metallic, faintly sweet, faintly like the inside of a butcher's cooler on a warm day. Somebody said it was crude. Somebody said it was some kind of red clay. Somebody with a little chemistry said it might be a bacterial mat, a colony of extremophiles, because there had been papers about that. Life in deep rock, and for a moment that explanation held because it was the only one available. Then the substance in the sample tray began to change. Where it met the air it darkened, it thickened, it formed a skin, it clotted. Nobody said anything for a while. There is a specific quality of silence that comes over working men when the work has stopped making sense, and it settled over that floor like weather. The diesel engines kept running. The lights kept humming. 9 men stood around a steel tray watching something coagulate. It was a floor hand named Delgado, 22 years old, who found the other thing. He'd stepped back from the tray with his stomach turning and put his hand flat against the drawworks housing to steady himself, the way you do, and he stood there for a moment breathing. And through the steel, up through the frame, up through the boots and the bones of his hand, he felt something move in the earth. It was not machinery. He knew every vibration that rig could make. It was a single slow pulse, a soft compression, a swell and release, transmitted through a mile of solid rock and arriving at the surface so faint that you would never notice it, unless you had gone perfectly still. He waited, unsure whether he had imagined it. 8 seconds later it came again. He counted this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Again. He called Arnett over without explaining why, and put the supervisor's hand where his own had been, and the two of them stood there in the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere with their palms against cold steel, not speaking, counting. 8 seconds, 8 seconds, 8 seconds. A man named Whitaker, who was leaning on the rail, smoking and watching them, said the thing that would follow every one of those 9 men for the rest of their lives. He said it lightly. He said it the way you say something to break a silence that has gone on too long. He said, "Sounds like a heartbeat." And then he laughed, because it was a joke, and nobody laughed with him. They shut the well in at dawn. Arnett did what a careful man does. He wrote it up. He described the loss of resistance, the depth, the returns, the coagulation, and in one line he clearly struggled with the periodic subsurface pulse of approximately 8 seconds. He packaged 3 sample jars. He sent everything up the chain and expected the ordinary outcome, which was that some laboratory in Houston would tell him it was a bacterial mat, and everyone would feel foolish and go back to work. Instead, on the second morning, 2 men in short sleeves and government shoes arrived in a car that had no business on that road. They were polite. They were extremely polite. They asked to see the logs, and then they asked to keep the logs. They asked each man individually what he had seen, and they wrote down the answers, and they did not once look surprised by any of it, which was the detail Arnett could never stop turning over. They did not look surprised. By the end of that week there was fence. By the end of the month there was more fence, and a gate, and a guard shack, and a second road grading in from the north that did not appear on any county map. The crew was paid in full for the remainder of the contract and reassigned, and each man signed a document he was not permitted to keep a copy of, and they all went back to their lives, and for the most part they kept their mouths shut because they were being paid to, and because, honestly, what would you even say? Delgado told his brother, once, drunk, in 1981. His brother thought he was talking about a dream. Whitaker did not tell anybody anything, ever. But his wife noticed that he stopped wearing a watch. When she finally asked him why, he said he did not like the ticking. That is where the public story of the mystery flesh pit ends and the private one begins, and the private one begins with 2 scientists in a cage descending into the dark. Dr. Miriam Vance was 41, a structural geologist with a specialty in evaporate deposits, which is a very polite way of saying she spent her career studying ancient salt. She'd grown up in Pennsylvania in a family of coal people and had spent her entire adult life explaining to men that she understood rock better than they did. She was not warm, she was thorough. She had a habit of repeating a question in exactly the same words when she did not like the answer, and she would keep repeating it, calmly, indefinitely, until somebody either answered it or left the room. Dr. Elias Hallberg was 53, a comparative anatomist out of a university that would later remove his name from its faculty listings. He had spent 30 years cutting open animals to understand the logic of how bodies are put together. He was talkative where Vance was quiet. He had an enormous laugh and a bad knee, and a habit of narrating whatever he was looking at, aloud, continuously, which drove some colleagues insane and which, in the end, produced the only real record of what they found down there, because the tape ran the entire time. They were told very little before they went down. They were told there was an anomalous biological deposit in a subsurface void. They were told to bring their own equipment. They were told that the work was classified, and that they should expect the classification to be permanent. The shaft had been widened. That in itself was startling to Vance, the sheer speed of it. The fact that in a matter of months somebody had sunk a lined and reinforced shaft with a working hoist into a formation that had been an exploratory hole in a worthless lease. The money that implied, the certainty that implied. Somebody, somewhere, had looked at 3 jars of red material and decided immediately that it was worth an amount of money that geologists do not normally see in their entire careers. The descent took a long time. That is one of the details Hallberg keeps returning to on the tape. The descent took a very long time, and it was cold, and then it was not cold, and then it was warm, and the warmth was the first thing that felt wrong. Rock warms with depth, predictably, about 1 degree Fahrenheit for every 70 feet or so. This warmed faster, and it warmed unevenly. There were pockets in the shaft where the air temperature climbed several degrees over a span you could measure with your outstretched arms, and then dropped again. Warmth like that means circulation. Circulation means something is moving. They reached the working level and stepped out into a space that their lamps could not find the far side of. The first thing Hallberg says on the tape, after a long pause, is a word he uses in a lecturing tone, almost cheerfully. He says the walls are wet. The second thing he says about a minute later is that the walls are not walls. Here is what they were standing in. It was a chamber, or the beginning of a chamber, roughly ovoid, and everything that should have been stone was instead a dense fibrous material arranged in visible bundles. The bundles ran in directions. They braided and separated and rejoined. Where the crews had cut into it to reinforce the shaft, the cut surfaces were layered. with a paler outer sheath and a darker interior, glistening, faintly resistant when pressed, and pressing produced a slow rebound. Hallberg touched it for a long time before he said anything else. Then he began to name things, and once he began he could not stop. He identified fascia. He identified what he was fairly certain were smooth muscle bundles arranged in a helical pattern, the same architecture you find in the wall of an intestine or the wall of an artery, an architecture that exists for one reason, which is to move material along a tube by squeezing it. He identified vessels, not caves that resembled vessels. Vessels with layered walls, with branching that followed the same mathematical rules you see in every circulatory system on Earth, dividing and dividing, the largest of them wide enough to drive a truck through, and the smallest of them thinner than thread, all of it fitting together with the unmistakable ugly practical elegance of anatomy. And he identified nerve. There was a bundle running along what he was already calling the dorsal side of the passage, pale, cabled, thicker than his own body, sheathed in something that behaved like connective tissue. When he touched it with an instrument, nothing happened. When he touched it again, harder, something happened 300 feet away. A shiver that travelled down the passage and made a quantity of loose material fall from the ceiling, and Vance said his name once, sharply, and he did not touch it again. She asked him the question she would end up asking for the next 30 years. She asked him what it was, and on the tape you can hear him take a breath and let it out, and you can hear the flat, exhausted honesty in his voice when he finally says it, because he is not a dramatic man, and he is not enjoying himself. He says we have been thinking about this backwards. He says we assumed we found an organism living in a cave. He says the cave is inside the organism. They spent 11 hours down there. They did not find a wall that was not tissue. They did not find a boundary of any kind. Every passage they surveyed opened into another passage, and every one of them was interior, and the deeper they went, the more clearly they could feel the slow 8-second compression that Delgado had felt through a steel housing a mile above them, except that down there you did not feel it in your hands. You felt it in your chest, in the water, in your body, in the fluid behind your eyes. The seismic survey came later, and the seismic survey is what broke Vance. She ran it herself. She ran it 3 times because she assumed she had made an error. The biological signature did not terminate. It did not thin out or become ambiguous at the edges the way a mineral body does. It continued in every direction they had instruments to look, with anatomical structures resolving at distances that made her recalculate her instrument tolerances because the alternative was to accept the number in front of her. She wrote a memorandum that November. It has one sentence in it that people who have read the file never forget. She wrote that the organism should not be able to exist. She meant it literally and technically, and it is worth explaining why, because it is the reason everything else in this story happens. There are hard physical limits on how large a living thing can be. Above a certain size, an organism cannot move oxygen through itself fast enough. It cannot remove heat fast enough because volume grows faster than surface area, and a body that big cooks itself from the inside. It cannot circulate fluid against its own weight. It cannot heal an injury before the injury kills it. Every giant that has ever lived, every whale and every sauropod sits pressed up against those limits and pays for its size with elaborate compromises. The thing under West Texas was not near those limits. It was well past them, in a way that should have been immediately and catastrophically fatal, unless it was not doing very much, unless its metabolism was so slow, so profoundly and unnaturally slow, that the ordinary rules did not apply to it in the ordinary way, unless it was in effect barely alive at all. 8 seconds between pulses, a heart the size of a county, beating 7 or 8 times a minute. Vance wrote a second memorandum in December, much shorter, essentially one question, and she sent it to everyone above her, and she kept sending it for 3 decades. Why isn't it moving? Nobody answered her. What happened instead was Anodyne. The Anodyne Corporation did not announce itself. It appeared the way a corporation appears in this kind of story. which is to say that 1 week the site was administered by an agency with an acronym, and the next week the paychecks had a different letterhead, and there were new people in the trailers who wore clean boots and used the word asset. They were not stupid people, that is important. In every telling of this story there is a temptation to make the company into cartoon villains, greedy men rubbing their hands in a boardroom, and it was not that. The men and women who built Anodyne into what it became were, by and large, intelligent, and many of them were genuinely thrilled by what they had found. They simply operated inside a framework where the only available verb for a discovery was to monetize it, and so they applied that verb relentlessly to the largest living thing anyone had ever seen. And the returns were extraordinary. The organism's tissues produced compounds that did not exist anywhere else. There were enzymes stable at temperatures that should have denatured them instantly. There were structural fibres with tensile properties that made materials engineers physically stand up out of their chairs. There were secretions with pharmacological effects that took years to characterise and generated patent portfolios that were, on paper, worth more than several small nations. There was a fluid harvested from certain deep glands that became, after processing, an industrial lubricant so good that its performance data was itself classified, because the performance data implied the source. And none of it seemed to hurt the creature. That was the thing that made it so easy. You could remove a mass of tissue the size of a house, an amount that would have been an unsurvivable wound in any animal, and come back a year later and find it regrown seamlessly, as though the site had never been touched. The scale of it made harvesting feel harmless. It was like taking a cup of water out of a lake. So the tunnels were reinforced. Steel and concrete went in. Elevators were installed. Real elevators, with buttons and handrails and inspection certificates. Ventilation systems went in, because the internal atmosphere was not breathable in several regions. Lighting went in, strung along the passages on cables that were bolted with anchors into living tissue. Laboratories were built inside chambers that had names in the file and numbers on the doors, cafeterias, locker rooms, a small clinic, a gift shop eventually, which is the detail that always makes people laugh and then stop laughing. Because the last step was the obvious one, and it was obvious to everyone, and it was inevitable from the first moment somebody realised the tunnels were safe enough to walk through without dying. If you have built a road into the most extraordinary place on Earth, somebody is going to want to sell tickets. The transition from classified industrial site to public attraction didn't happen in one decision. It happened the way these things always happen, through 100 small reasonable steps, each of which made sense on its own. There were tours for regulators, then tours for legislators, then tours for the families of legislators, then a limited programme of educational visits, and then a visitor centre at the surface built to handle the educational visits, and then somebody in accounting noticed how much money the visitor centre gift shop was making without anybody actually going underground. And then it was a park. You have to sit with how absurd that is, and how completely believable it is at the same time. There were brochures. There were brochures with cheerful sans serif type, and a stylised logo and a smiling cartoon mascot. And there were safety pamphlets that used phrases like, "Please remain on marked pathways and do not touch exposed tissue, and in the event of a peristaltic event, proceed calmly to the nearest marked assembly point." There was a scenic overlook. There were guided walks with names like the Grand Gallery and the Cathedral of Vessels. There was a restaurant with a viewing window. There were postcards. There were refrigerator magnets. There was a plush toy. Families drove out from Lubbock and El Paso and Albuquerque in station wagons full of sunburned children and coolers of soda, and they paid at a booth, and they rode an elevator down into the body of a living creature, and they ate lunch in there, and they bought a magnet, and they drove home, and it was a nice day out. Millions of people did this. Over the years, millions. And the thing about human beings, the genuinely astonishing thing, is how fast this became normal. Within a decade, there were people who had worked there for their entire adult lives, who parked in the same spot every morning and rode the same elevator down into the same warm, humid corridor and complained about the vending machine. There were people who got engaged down there. There were people who found it boring. A gas station attendant in a town 20 miles away was once asked by a journalist what he thought about living next to the flesh pit, and he shrugged and said it brought in business, and the traffic on holiday weekends was a nightmare. That is not a failure of imagination. That is what imagination is for. Human beings survive by making the unbearable ordinary. It is our best trick and our worst one. Miriam Vance never managed it. She stayed. That is the part her critics never understood, and the part that mattered most. She had every reason to resign, and she did not, because she had worked out something early that governed the rest of her life, which was that if she left, they would replace her with somebody who did not ask the question. So she stayed, and she asked it, in meeting after meeting for 30 years. She asked it while the tunnels were being cut. She asked it while the elevators were being installed. She asked it in a conference room in 1988 with a marketing team who were presenting logo concepts, and one of them laughed, thinking she was joking. Why isn't it moving? She was not asking rhetorically. She was asking as a scientist who understood that the answer was load-bearing. Every safety assumption in that entire operation, every emergency procedure, every insurance calculation, every brochure that told a family it was safe to bring a toddler down there, rested on a single unexamined premise. The premise was that the creature was dormant because dormancy was its natural state. Nobody had ever demonstrated that. Nobody had even seriously tried. They had simply found it asleep and assumed that asleep was what it was. The ancient structures were found in the summer of 1982, and they were found by accident, which is how everything in this story is found. A survey team pushing into an unmapped region encountered a passage that did not look like the others. The tissue had been altered, not cut recently, but altered a very long time ago, worn smooth in a way that suggested traffic, and at the far end of it there was a floor, an actual floor, fitted stone, laid flat, mortarless, the joints tight enough that a knife would not go in. They stopped the survey, and they called for an archaeologist, and the archaeologist they got was Dr. Samuel Quinones, who was 34 and had spent his career on pre-contact sites in the American Southwest, and who was, at the time, deeply unimpressed by the vagueness of the offer he'd received. He described his first descent in a private notebook that he kept in violation of about 9 agreements. He wrote that he had prepared himself to be underwhelmed, and that he had walked out of the elevator and been unable to speak for a full minute, and that the first coherent thought he had was not about the creature at all. His first coherent thought was, somebody has been here. The structures were extensive. There were platforms. There were low walls that enclosed nothing obvious. There were worked stone tools, hammerstones and scrapers and long slender rods of a dense material that had been imported from somewhere else because it did not occur naturally within 400 miles. There were the remains of fires, in hearths, in a place with no wood. There were what he eventually concluded were sleeping areas. People had not visited this place. People had lived in it. Radiocarbon on the hearth material came back with dates that spanned centuries, and then, as more sites were found, dates that spanned millennia. This was not one expedition by one lost group. This was a continuous tradition. Generation after generation had come down into that thing, in the dark, without lights, without ropes as we would understand them, without any of the equipment that made Quinones's own descent survivable, and they had done it on purpose, repeatedly, for longer than most civilizations have existed. He assumed at first the obvious thing. He assumed it was a cult site, a place of worship, a god beneath the earth, and priests who came to serve it. It is the right assumption. It is what the evidence looks like at a glance, and it is what every consultant who reviewed his early reports agreed with. It was wrong, and Quinones was the one who proved it wrong, and he did it by being annoyed about architecture. Because temples have a grammar. Sacred sites, across every culture that has ever built one, are arranged around sight lines and thresholds and axes. They face things. They frame things. They are built to make a person feel small at a specific moment, and everything about their placement serves that experience. These structures did not do any of that. They ignored the most visually spectacular chambers entirely. There were galleries down there that would stop a modern engineer in his tracks, vaulted spaces hundreds of feet high, and the ancient builders had walked straight through them and built nothing. Instead, every single site clustered around a specific kind of anatomical feature: nerve junctions, major ganglia, the places where the creature's neural architecture converged and concentrated. They were not building where it was beautiful, they were building where it could feel. And then there were the carvings. They were not elaborate. That was the strange thing about them. This was not decorative art. It was closer to signage. The same two elements repeated across hundreds of miles of interior passage, executed by people separated from each other by centuries, in a form so consistent that Quignons could identify one from 20 feet away with a bad flashlight. The lower element was a long horizontal mass, drawn simply, with a series of marks beneath it that he eventually interpreted as depth. The thing under the ground. The upper element, directly above it, was an eye, closed, a curved line with lashes, a shut eye above a sleeping shape, repeated and repeated and repeated, in every language of stone that those people had, across a span of time that dwarfs the entire written history of our species. He catalogued 460 of them before he stopped counting, and for years he read that symbol the way anyone would read it. A closed eye is a symbol of the divine mystery. A closed eye is the God who sleeps and will one day wake and judge. It is a devotional image. It appears in 100 traditions. It took him until 1991 to understand that he had been reading it as a statement when it was written as an instruction. Not the God sleeps. Keep it asleep. Before we get to how he proved that, you should know what the government did in 1984, because Quiñones did not know about it at the time, and it is the reason his conclusion mattered so much when he finally reached it. The organism's nervous system produced measurable electrical activity, enormous activity in absolute terms, though pitiful for a body of that size, like a city with 3 lights on. It could be detected at the surface through a mile of rock with equipment sensitive enough, and that fact interested several agencies for reasons that had nothing to do with biology, and everything to do with the possibility of detecting things through solid ground. So they proposed an experiment. They would apply a controlled electrical stimulus to a major nerve trunk and measure the propagation. Standard neurophysiology. The same procedure a medical student performs on a frog, scaled up with a great deal more paperwork. Vance objected in writing. Her objection is 4 pages long, and it is, by the account of everyone who has read it, one of the calmest and most devastating documents in the entire file. She pointed out that they did not know the creature's threshold for arousal. She pointed out that they did not know whether its dormancy was regulated or imposed. She pointed out that in every animal ever studied, the difference between a stimulus that produces a local reflex and a stimulus that produces a whole-body response is a matter of degree, and that they had no idea where that degree lay, and that they were proposing to find out by crossing it. She was overruled. She was told the stimulus was several orders of magnitude below any conceivable threshold. They ran it on a Thursday afternoon in March. The stimulus lasted a little under 2 seconds. The response began at 4 seconds and was recorded by every seismograph in a radius of 110 miles. It was not an earthquake. That is what makes it so much worse. An earthquake has a signature, a sharp release along a fault, a characteristic shape on a drum. This had no fault mechanics at all. It was a broad, slow, distributed motion, spread across an enormous area, rising and falling smoothly over about 11 seconds. 3 towns felt it. A water tower in one of them was reported as swaying. The official explanation was subsidence related to fluid extraction, which is a real phenomenon in that region, and was accepted without much interest. The program was terminated the same day, and the file was closed so thoroughly that Vance was unable to obtain her own data from it for 19 years. But she had been in the room, and she had seen the trace before it went away, and it changed the shape of her thinking permanently. Because here is what that trace meant. For 11 years, the entire operation had proceeded on the assumption that the creature was an environment, a place, geology that happened to be made of meat. Nobody had said that out loud, but everybody had behaved as though it were true, because you cannot bolt a handrail into something you believe can feel the drill. The trace meant it could feel the drill. It meant that every shaft they had sunk, every ton of tissue they had harvested, every charge they had set, every elevator they had installed, every one of the millions of small warm human bodies walking through its interior with their sneakers and their cameras and their body heat was sensory input. Not necessarily meaningful input, not necessarily perceived, but arriving, nonetheless, into a nervous system that demonstrably conducted. Vance put it in a memorandum that was not circulated widely, in language she never used anywhere else. She wrote that they had spent 11 years assuming they were splunking. She wrote that they had in fact spent 11 years crawling around inside something that could wake up. The other thing that happened in the 80s was the marrow folk, and I want to be careful here, because this is the part of the story where people want it to become a monster movie, and it never quite does. The organism had an ecology. That was established early, and it was not in itself shocking. Any body has passengers. Ours are microscopic, and there are trillions of them. A body of that size, at that temperature, with that much available energy, was always going to have passengers scaled to match. So they found things. They found flat, translucent creatures like enormous flukes that lived in the vessel walls and grazed on the lining. They found something like a colonial organism that hung in curtains from the ceilings of certain warm chambers and pulsed in slow waves when the air moved. They found a segmented animal, 9 feet long, blind, with a mouth engineered for a single purpose, which was to attach to a specific class of duct and stay attached for what the researchers estimated was decades. None of them were aggressive in any meaningful sense. They were parasites and commensals, and like most parasites they were extremely specialised and extremely uninterested in anything they had not evolved alongside. Several of them died within hours of being removed from the internal environment. Some of them could not be kept alive outside at all. The workers gave them names. Of course they did. You cannot work a place like that for years without generating a vocabulary. Some of the names were affectionate. Then, in the spring of 1986, a survey team following a duct into an unmapped region came around a rare bend and found tracks in a soft deposit on the floor. They were bipedal. They were roughly the size of a human footprint, slightly narrower, with proportions that were wrong in a way nobody could immediately articulate. The heel was too small. There were digits, 5 of them, and the digits were too long. The stride length was greater than it should have been for the size. There were a great many of them, and they were not all the same age. The story spread through the workforce the way that kind of story does, quickly and badly, and within a year the underground crews had an entire folklore. Figures seen at the edge of the lights, something standing in a side passage that was gone when the beam came back, sounds from unlit regions, a word that somebody coined and everybody adopted because human beings will name a fear before they will admit to it. The marrow folk. Management handled it exactly the way you would expect. There were memoranda about fatigue, there were mandatory rest rotations, there was a very carefully worded bulletin about the well-documented psychological effects of extended work in low-light subterranean environments, which is a real phenomenon, and which was, in most cases, probably the correct explanation. Vance did not care about the sightings. She never claimed to have seen anything, and she was privately dismissive of most of the accounts. She cared about the tracks, because tracks are data, and because she noticed something in the survey plots that nobody else had bothered to look for. She compiled every documented track site over 11 years, and plotted them against the anatomical map, and then she plotted the direction of travel. Every single set went inward. Not one set of tracks was ever recorded heading toward an exit, toward the surface, toward light, toward the warm, bright, human-occupied regions where food waste and heat and opportunity were abundant. Every trail, without exception, ran deeper, toward the great neural masses, toward the organs that the survey teams had not reached, and in most cases could not reach. Whatever they were not scavenging on the edges of a human operation. They were going somewhere. The 1990s brought better instruments, and better instruments brought the number. Seismic imaging improved enormously in that decade. Computing power arrived that let you take an ocean of return data and build an actual three-dimensional model out of it. And so, in a project that was originally justified as a routine update to the structural safety maps, Anodyne ran a full deep survey of the formation. The results were classified within 72 hours, which is fast even by the standards of an operation like that one. The public park maps, the ones printed on the back of the brochure with the smiling mascot, showed a system of galleries and passages covering an area you could walk across in a long day. Impressive, comprehensible, roughly the footprint of a large mine. The survey showed biological signature extending beneath an area of the Permian Basin so large that Hallberg, who was by then in his 70s and semi-retired and had been brought in to consult, initially refused to sign off on the analysis on the grounds that the instrument must be wrong. It was not wrong. And then they found the other openings. There were more. There had always been more, and nobody had gone looking because the entire operation was organised around a single site with a single shaft and a single gift shop. When the survey team went back through the regional data with fresh eyes, they identified a number of additional discontinuities across West Texas, where the same biological signature came within a few hundred feet of the surface. Some of them were under private ranchland. One was under a county road. One was beneath a stock pond that had, for as long as anyone in that family could remember, occasionally gone warm. Hallberg plotted them. He was an anatomist. It was the only thing he could have done with a set of points, and he had been doing it his whole life. And when the plot resolved, he sat and looked at it for a long time, and then went outside and did not come back in for 2 hours. Because the arrangement was symmetrical. Not perfectly. Nothing in a body is perfect. But there was a clear axis, and the openings paired across it, and their spacing followed a progression, and their relative positions had the specific relational logic that anatomical features have. They were not caves that happened to reach the creature. They were structures, ports, openings of a kind arranged on a body the way openings are arranged on a body. And that meant the famous entrance, the one with the parking lot and the ticket booth and the elevator, the one that every visitor had walked through since the park opened, was not the mouth. It was not the primary anything. Hallberg's report contains a sentence he clearly rewrote several times, and it ends with the admission that broke the last of the operation's confidence. He wrote that after 23 years of continuous study, direct physical access and unlimited funding, the research program was not able to state with confidence where the organism's head was, or its heart, or whether the words head and heart applied to it at all. Miriam Vance was 71 years old in 2003, and she should have retired a decade earlier, and everyone in the program understood by then that she was not going to. She had outlasted 4 directors. She had outlasted the agency that originally held the site. She had a small office with no window, which was a joke that nobody made out loud, and a filing system that existed on paper because she did not trust anything else, and a reputation as the difficult old woman who asked the same question in meetings. The deep expedition of 2003 was authorised for entirely commercial reasons. There were compounds in the deep neural tissue that had shown extraordinary preliminary results, and the analysis suggested the concentrations increased with proximity to the major ganglionic masses, and so a plan was drawn up to push a survey and harvesting corridor further into the creature than anyone had ever gone. Vance fought it, lost, and then asked to be included on the descent. Nobody wanted her on it. She was 71. The medical clearance alone took 3 months and required 2 exceptions. But she had been on the first descent in 1974, and there was a sentimental logic to it that somebody in an office found appealing, and so on a morning in October she put on a suit that weighed almost as much as she did, and went down for the last time. The corridor took them 11 days to traverse. The environment down there was not like the park. In the tourist regions, the internal atmosphere had been engineered and scrubbed and cooled and lit, and there were floors and rails and signs. Beyond the last maintained station, none of that existed. The air was thick and warm and unbreathable without equipment. The passages were not level. They contracted slowly on their own schedule, so that a corridor you walk through on Tuesday might not admit you on Friday. The team moved through by consent, essentially. They went where the body allowed. And it was loud. That is a detail that never survives into the summaries. People imagined silence down there, and it was the opposite. Fluid moving through vessels the width of highway tunnels makes a sound you feel in your sternum. There were groans in the structure as tissue shifted under its own weight. There were sudden distant reports sharp as gunshots that nobody ever identified. And under all of it, always, the 8-second pulse, so pervasive at that depth that the team stopped noticing it consciously and only realised how much it had been governing them afterward, when several of them reported that on the surface, for weeks, their own hearts felt fast and wrong. On the 9th day they entered the neural mass, and Vance's recordings from that section are the only part of the expedition file that has ever been described publicly, and only in paraphrase. She describes a space in which the concept of a wall no longer applied. The bundles were the size of buildings. They passed overhead and underfoot and to either side, converging, layered, and where they converged the surrounding tissue was pale and dense, and threaded with vessels in numbers that suggested an enormous metabolic demand. This was the most expensive real estate in the organism. Whatever the body was spending its very slow energy on, it was spending it here. And on the 11th day, at the deepest point they would reach, one of the survey lights found something that was not tissue. It was black, not dark. Black, in the way that manufactured things are black, absorbing the light and giving almost nothing back, and it was smooth. Perfectly smooth. In an environment where every surface was fibrous or wet or textured or ridged, there was a curved black expanse with no seam, no grain, no pore, no imperfection at any magnification the team could achieve in the field. It was large. The exposed portion alone was the size of a building, and the exposure was partial because the tissue had grown around it. That was the first detail Vance recorded, and it is the detail she considered most important, and she is right, and it deserves a moment of your attention before you fall asleep on it. The tissue had grown around it, not scarred over it, not encysted it, the way a body walls off a splinter it cannot expel. The neural architecture had developed around the object, integrated with it, incorporated it into its own structural logic, in the manner of a tree that grows around a fence post over the course of 50 years, until the post is inside the wood, and the wood does not know it was ever separate, which meant it had been there while the creature was growing, which meant it predated the anatomy. They spent 19 hours at the site. They found the connections on the 4th hour, and once they found the first one, they found hundreds. The object interfaced directly with the major nerve trunks, not by contact but by penetration, fine structures entering the neural tissue and dividing into a network so fine that the field instruments could not resolve its terminations, and it was on. Vance's instrument recorded a continuous patterned electrical output passing from the object into the organism's nervous system. Not random noise, not a byproduct. A regular structured waveform, cycling, with a period she was able to characterize to 4 decimal places before her power reserves ran down. She spent the next 4 months analysing that waveform, and when she understood it she did not tell anyone for a week, which was completely out of character, and which several colleagues later said frightened them more than the finding did. The pattern was inhibitory. Every nervous system that has ever been studied works by balancing 2 things: signals that make a neuron more likely to fire, and signals that make it less likely to fire. Excitation and inhibition. Every thought you have ever had is a pattern of things being allowed and other things being suppressed. Anesthesia works on that principle. So does sleep. The waveform coming out of that object was a suppression signal, delivered continuously, at massive scale, directly into the neural core of the largest living thing on Earth. And that reframed everything, all the way back to the beginning. The creature was not dormant. Dormancy is something an animal does. Hibernation, torpor, estivation. These are states a body enters, regulates and exits according to its own needs and its own clock. This was not that. This was maintenance. This was something being held down. Vance wrote her final significant memorandum in April of 2004, and it is very short, and the operative sentence is the one that a great many people have since had cause to think about. She wrote that for 30 years the program had been asking why the organism was not moving. She wrote that the question had always been wrong. The question was not why it was not moving. The question was who was stopping it. Samuel Quinones was 55 by then, tenured, respectable, and still in violation of 9 agreements, and when Vance sent him the summary he went back to his carvings. He had 460 documented instances of the closed eye. He had by that point an enormous body of contextual material, hearths, tools, the worn stone, the placement, the spans of occupation. And he had always had one thing that bothered him, which was the tools themselves, because the long, slender rods of imported dense material had no obvious use. They were not blades, they were not scrapers or awls or drills. They were rods of consistent length, ground smooth, some of them worn at one end in a way consistent with repeated impact against a soft-yielding surface. He had classified them, years earlier, as ritual objects, which is what archaeologists write down when they do not know. He tested them. Working from the anatomical data, with a great deal of help from a neurophysiologist who was never named in the paper, he modelled what a rhythmic mechanical impact of that force, at that frequency, applied at those specific anatomical locations would actually do to the creature's nervous system. It produced inhibition, not powerfully, not remotely on the scale of the black object, but measurably, locally, in exactly the same functional direction, applied at exactly the anatomical points where the ancient sites were built. The rituals were not worship. They never had been. They were procedure. Somewhere in the deep past, people had learned something about this creature. Perhaps they had seen it stir. Perhaps a generation of them had lived through something that killed a great many of them. However they learned it, they learned that certain actions performed at certain places in a certain rhythm kept the thing under the ground quiet. And they taught it to their children, and their children taught it to theirs, and it was maintained for a span of time so long that the original reason wore away like the writing on a stone. And that is the most human thing in this entire story. Because knowledge does not survive as knowledge. It survives as habit, and then as custom, and then as ritual, and then as superstition, and finally as a story that a grandmother tells that nobody believes anymore. The instruction erodes into a symbol, the symbol erodes into a decoration, and at the end of that long, slow process there is a closed eye carved on a wall, and a people who still perform the observance every year at the proper time, without any of them being able to tell you what would happen if they stopped. They did not know why anymore. They just knew that you did not wake it up. And then those people were gone, and the ones who came after them found the carvings and called it primitive religion, and the ones who came after those built a parking lot and an elevator and a restaurant with a viewing window, and sold a plush toy in the gift shop, and drilled and cut and blasted and harvested and stimulated for 34 continuous years directly into the nervous system of the thing the carvings had been begging them to leave alone. The 4th of July weekend in 2007 was, by every projection, going to be the busiest in the park's history. There had been a marketing push. There was a new attraction opening in one of the upper galleries. The weather was clear. The parking lots filled by 10 in the morning on the Friday, and there was a line at the ticket booth that wrapped around the visitor centre, and the people in that line were doing what people in lines do, which is complaining cheerfully and buying overpriced drinks and taking photographs of their children in front of the sign. By early afternoon there were, according to the reconstruction, somewhere over 2,000 people inside the organism. Visitors, staff, contractors, food service workers, a school group, a wedding party who had booked the grand gallery for photographs. The first indication that anything was wrong was recorded at 11 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, and it was not an alarm, it was a maintenance report. A technician in a service corridor noted that a section of tissue had contracted enough to reduce a passage width below the marked clearance. He filed it as a routine anatomical variance, which happened perhaps twice a year, and which required rerouting foot traffic and nothing else. 9 minutes later there were 4 more. At 29 minutes past 2, the internal temperature in 3 of the deep galleries began to rise, not sharply, half a degree, then another half. At 2:41, the 8-second interval changed. It is worth stopping on that, because of everyone in that place, only a handful of people were in a position to understand what it meant, and one of them was in an office at the surface, watching a strip chart she had been watching for 33 years. The pulse had been 8 seconds for as long as it had been measured. Through everything. Through the drilling, through the excavation, through the blasting, through the stimulation experiment in 1984, through 3 decades of continuous industrial intrusion, the interval had never varied by more than a fraction. At 2:41 it was 7.5 seconds. At 2:56 it was 7. Miriam Vance called the site director on an internal line and told him to evacuate the park. He asked her what the emergency was. It is not fair to condemn him for that. There was no fire, there was no structural alarm. There were 4 unusual maintenance tickets and a temperature drift and a woman on the phone telling him to remove 2,000 people from a facility on the busiest afternoon of the year because a number on a chart had changed by 1 second. He told her he would raise it at the operations meeting. The evacuation order was eventually issued at 3:19. By then it did not matter. What happened over the following 4 hours is described in the official investigation in the language of engineering failure, and every word of it is accurate and all of it misses the point entirely. The passages did not collapse, they constricted. Smooth muscle bundles in the walls of the great ducts, structures that had been inert for the entire history of human contact with the organism, began to do the only thing that smooth muscle does, which is to shorten. Corridors narrowed. Door frames buckled inward as the tissue they were anchored to drew together. In several sections the reinforcement did exactly what reinforcement does, which is to hold, and the tissue simply closed around it and past it, and the steel became an obstruction inside a shrinking tube. Regions of the interior that had been surveyed and labelled decades earlier as inactive digestive structures became active digestive structures. The ventilation system, which had been engineered to move breathable air through a stable cavity, was operating inside a cavity that was no longer stable, and it failed in a way that its designers had never modelled because the failure mode had not been conceivable. At the surface, biological material began to erupt through the primary shaft and through 2 of the secondary ports that Hallberg had identified in the 90s, one of which was under a ranch road 11 miles away, and the resulting scenes are the reason most people have heard of this at all. And under all of it the ground moved, not violently. That is the part that survivors describe most consistently and that nobody expects. There was no shaking, no roar, no collapse. There was a long, slow swell, like a floor becoming a deck, like standing on something that was rearranging itself very calmly beneath you. The emergency response was heroic and largely futile. Volunteer fire departments from 4 counties drove toward a disaster they had no framework for. There were people who went back down more than once. There were staff members who put their bodies in door mechanisms to hold passages open. The full account of that day contains as much ordinary courage as any disaster in history, and it is worth remembering that, because the rest of the story is about institutions, and institutions did not carry anyone out. People did. Miriam Vance was not at the surface for any of it. At 6 o'clock that evening she was placed on a military transport with a team she had never met, and taken down a service shaft that was not on the park maps, and by 9 that night she was moving through the deep corridor toward the black object, with 14 soldiers who had been briefed 20 minutes earlier, on the existence of the thing they were being sent to reach. Their orders had nothing to do with rescue. Their orders were to restore suppression. We do not know exactly what they did down there. That is not evasion. It is simply the truth of the record. The mission file has never surfaced and Vance never described it to anyone, and the only account we have is a single line in her private notes written some weeks afterward, which reads, "In full, it was already correcting itself." The organism stopped. At approximately 2 in the morning on the 5th of July, the constriction ceased. The temperature stabilized. The digestive activity ended. Over the following 11 days, the internal pressure normalized, the swelling subsided, and every measurement that had drifted back. By the end of the month, the pulse interval was 8 seconds again. The public story after that is a story about a corporation, and it went the way those stories go. Anodyne was finished. The investigations were extensive and the findings were damning, and they were also, in a sense, deeply comforting, because they were about things people already knew how to be angry about. Inadequate emergency egress, deferred maintenance, suppressed internal safety reports, executives who had been warned, a regulatory structure that had been captured so completely that the agency responsible for the park's safety inspections had 4 employees, 3 of whom had previously worked for the company. That is a scandal that fits in a newspaper. It has villains you can name and a moral you can state. The park was closed permanently, the site was sealed, the exclusion zone was drawn, and the country moved on with a satisfying account of what had happened, which was that a greedy company had cut corners and people had died. The classified biological assessment was completed 14 months later, and it does not read like that at all. It is a dry document. It is mostly tables, and its conclusion, stated in the flat, affectless register of technical writing, is the single most frightening thing in this entire story, and I want to give it to you slowly. The organism's cardiac interval decreased from 8 seconds to 6.1 seconds, and returned to baseline within 31 days. Contraction was observed in an estimated fraction of 1% of surveyed muscle tissue. Digestive activation was localized and partial. Motion was recorded in structures classified as distal extremities. No evidence of central neural arousal was detected at any point during the event. That last line is the one. No evidence of central neural arousal. It never woke up. Everything that happened on that weekend, the constriction, the deaths, the eruptions, the ground swelling like a slow tide across 4 counties, the end of a company and the sealing of a site and the exclusion zone that is still there, all of it happened while the creature remained, by every measure available to the people studying it, unconscious. Its heart sped up slightly. Some muscle groups tightened. A little of its digestion switched on. Something at the far end of it moved. That is all. If you have ever watched a large dog sleeping on a floor, you have seen it. The shift, the heavy resettling. The animal changes position without any part of it becoming aware, and then it goes still again, and it never knew it did anything at all. That is what happened in West Texas in 2007. It rolled over. And nobody, then or now, has any idea what would happen if it opened its eyes. Miriam Vance died in 2011 at 79 in a house in New Mexico with a view of nothing in particular. She'd been ill for a while. She'd spent her last years writing letters that were not answered and requesting documents that were not released, and she had also, quietly, been doing one final piece of work. 6 weeks before she died, she mailed Samuel Quinones a box. It contained seismic data, not from Texas, from everywhere. She'd spent years pulling deep survey records from every source she could still reach: academic archives, decommissioned defense programs, petroleum exploration data, the enormous global network of stations built to detect nuclear tests. She'd gone looking for a specific signature, the particular way a very large biological mass returns a seismic wave, which is different from the way rock returns it, and which she was possibly the only person alive who knew how to recognise. She found it beneath a region of Central Australia. She found it beneath Siberia. She found it in North Africa, under sand that had been desert for longer than our species has existed. She found it under the ice in 2 places in Antarctica. She found it in South America. Some of the returns were ambiguous, several were not, and at least 4 of them showed internal structure, at scale, with the same characteristic organisation the Permian Basin creature displayed. The thing under Texas was not unique. It was simply the one we happened to drill into. Quinones spent his last working years on the map. He was an archaeologist, and archaeologists think in deep time, and so he did the thing that would not have occurred to a geophysicist. He took the locations and he ran them backwards through plate tectonics. The continents move. Everything we call a place is a temporary arrangement. If those organisms had been where they are for a very long time, then the pattern we see today is a scrambled version of an original pattern, and to see the original you have to reassemble the world. So he did, at 200 million years, and then at 300, and then further, watching the points drift together as the continents closed up into single masses, and at a certain configuration, deep in the Paleozoic they resolved. The distribution was regular, not identical spacing, but ordered in a way that natural. Processes do not produce. Biology clusters where conditions favour it, which means it clumps and thins and clumps again. This did not clump. It was distributed evenly across the available surface, with the specific quality of arrangement that things have when something has decided where to put them. Quinones wrote one line in his notes that his colleagues found hardest to read, because he was, in every other respect, a rigorously conservative scholar who never wrote a sentence he could not defend. He wrote, "These were placed, and once you have written that, there is only one question left, and it is not what are they. It is why here." The last piece came 4 years later, and Quinones found it in Vance's own numbers, which he had been going through for the 5th or 6th time simply because there was nothing else left to go through. Everyone had always assumed the repeating seismic pulse beneath the Permian Basin was the heartbeat. That was the story from the first night in 1973, when a young man put his hand on a housing and counted to 8. It was the heartbeat. Everything in the file called it that. It was 2 rhythms. They were very close together in frequency, and one of them was much weaker, and for 38 years every instrument and every analyst had read them as one signal with a slight irregularity. Vance had separated them in the last year of her life. The first was biological, cardiac, the creature. The second came from the black object, and it was not the suppression waveform. The suppression signal went inward, into the nerve. This went the other way. It went out, into the rock, into the mantle, in a long, slow pulse that had been propagating outward from beneath West Texas continuously, without interruption, for as long as anyone was capable of measuring. It was structured. It carried information, in the technical sense, a pattern that could not be produced by any natural periodic process, repeating with a fidelity that no geological mechanism achieves. It was a transmission. And here is the last thing, and then I will let you sleep. Quinones compared the recordings from before the disaster with the recordings from after. For every year of the archive, going back to the first instruments placed at the site in 1974, and by inference for a span of time that the object's own integration into the creature's anatomy suggests runs into the millions of years, the transmission had been identical. The same pattern. Repeated. Unchanging. A sentence spoken over and over into the dark for longer than there have been mountains where the mountains are now. In the second week of July in 2007, it changed. Not gradually. It changed within hours of the moment the organism's cardiac interval began to shorten, and it has never gone back. Because the object was never only a restraint, something that keeps a thing asleep, and also watches whether the thing stays asleep and also reports continuously to somewhere else is not a lock. It is an alarm. Whatever put those organisms into the crust of this planet did not simply bury them and walk away. It left something behind at each one, holding the creature down and holding the line open, transmitting the same steady reassurance across an unimaginable span of time. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is still fine. And then a company from Texas sold 2,000 tickets on a holiday weekend, and the signal changed. The final page of the classified assessment is an appendix that appears to have been added late, and it has nothing to do with biology, and it is only 4 sentences long. It notes that in the autumn of 2007, a facility engaged in radio astronomy recorded an unusual repeating signal of undetermined origin, apparently entering the solar system from outside it. It notes that the source could not be localized. It notes that the signal was catalogued, could not be replicated, and was eventually attributed to instrumentation error. And it notes that its mathematical structure was consistent with the transmission recorded beneath the Permian Basin. So the thing under West Texas was never calling for help. It was not praying, and it was not warning us, and it was not, in any sense we would recognise, aware that we were there at all. It was filing a report. It reported a containment failure, and several months later, from somewhere out past everything we have. Ever managed to see something acknowledged receipt? Nothing has happened since. It has been almost 20 years. The exclusion zone is quiet. The road out to the visitor centre is fenced at the county line, and the sign has been taken down, and the parking lot has gone to weeds, and out there in that flat, honest nothing. The wind comes down from the northwest with 400 miles of nothing in its way, and underneath all of it, 6 or 7 times a minute, something enormous and patient and unconscious goes on with the only thing it has done for millions of years. And whatever received the message is presumably still out there too, having heard it, doing whatever such a thing does with the news that one of its sleepers stirred, which is either nothing at all, or it is on its way. Before we dive into tonight's story, I want to give a huge shout out to Optic Goku for the story idea. Your comments and engagement mean everything, and they keep these stories coming. To everyone listening, drop your story ideas in the comments below. What conspiracy theories do you want explored? What mysteries keep you up at night? Your suggestions shape this channel, and we try and read every single one. Now, let's get into tonight's investigation. The envelope arrives on a Tuesday, March 14th, 2006, Sacramento, California. Department of Education Records Office, 3rd floor. A woman named Patricia Hernandez is sorting through the Daily Mail, requisition forms, budget reports, interdepartmental memos when she finds it. Manila envelope. No return address, no postage stamp, no courier log entry. Someone walked into the building, bypassed security, and slipped it under the glass door of the records vault. Patricia should report it. Protocol dictates that all unmarked deliveries be flagged for inspection. But she's been working in government administration for 23 years, and she's learned that sometimes the most important documents are the ones that arrive without fanfare. She opens it. Inside, 17 photocopied pages. The quality is poor. Copies of copies, text swimming in and out of focus, whole paragraphs drowned beneath thick black redaction bars. But one page survives almost intact. It's a list. Names arranged in 2 columns beneath a header that reads Longitudinal Cognitive Development Cohort, Phase Termination Review, Department of Education, Classification Level, Confidential. Below that, another line, GATE, Cohort 7, 1998 intake. 32 names, most are redacted, black bars covering first names, last names, sometimes both. But one name, halfway down the second column, remains completely visible. Someone forgot to black it out, or maybe they wanted it found. Evan Michael Halbrook, DOB, June 12th, 1990. Status, active monitoring. Patricia reads the document 3 times. Then she makes a decision that will change everything. She doesn't report it, she doesn't file it, she scans it, saves it to a thumb drive, and walks out of the building during her lunch break. By 5 p.m, the document is uploaded to 3 different servers. By midnight, it's circulating on encrypted forums where people discuss things the government doesn't want discussed. By morning, Evan Halbrook's life will never be the same. The classroom smells like tempera paint and pencil shavings, and the particular staleness that accumulates in rooms full of 8-year-olds on a Thursday afternoon in late April. Evan Halbrook sits at his desk in the 3rd row, 4 seats from the window, working on a math worksheet that's far too easy. He finishes the multiplication problems in 7 minutes and spends the remaining 23 drawing geometric patterns in the margins, interlocking triangles, spirals, fractals that emerge without conscious thought. He's been doing this for as long as he can remember. Drawing patterns, seeing connections, understanding systems before anyone explains them. His teachers call him gifted, which is a word that makes him uncomfortable because it implies he's been given something, when really it just feels like he notices things other people don't. At 2:15 p.m, the classroom door opens. Mrs. Patterson, his teacher, looks up from her desk. The woman in the doorway is tall, maybe 5'10", wearing a grey blazer over a white blouse, dark slacks, sensible shoes. She's carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a lanyard with a plastic ID badge that catches the fluorescent light. Her hair is pulled back in a severe bun. She doesn't smile. "Excuse me, Mrs. Patterson," the woman says. Her voice is flat, professional, empty of warmth. "I'm here for Evan Halbrook." Every child in the room turns to look at Evan. 23 pairs of eyes. He feels his face flush. Mrs. Patterson stands. "Of course. Evan, please bring your pencil and follow Mrs. Dr. Leland," the woman says. "Just the pencil. He won't need anything else." Evan stands. His legs feel strange, like they belong to someone else. He picks up his pencil, a yellow number 2 with the eraser chewed down to the metal, and walks to the front of the room. Behind him, he hears whispers. He doesn't look back. The hallway's empty. Their footsteps echo on the linoleum, his soft, hers sharp and rhythmic. They walk past the nurse's office. past the library with its smell of old books and carpet cleaner, past the cafeteria where lunch ladies are already preparing tomorrow's meals. They reach a part of the school Evan has never been to before, a side exit near the maintenance closet, Doctor. Leland pushes open the door and suddenly they're outside, behind the main building, walking across a strip of dead grass toward a portable classroom Evan never knew existed. It's old. Older than the other portables. The paint is sun-faded, the windows tinted dark, the door secured with a keypad lock. Dr. Leland punches in a code. 5 digits, too fast for Evan to see, and the lock clicks open. Inside, the room is cold. Much colder than it should be. The air conditioning is running at full blast even though it's barely 70 degrees outside. The fluorescent lights hum louder here, a frequency that makes Evan's teeth ache. There are 6 desks arranged in 2 rows of 3, each with a wooden partition between them like voting booths. 3 other children are already seated. Evan recognises one, a girl named Lena Crow from the 4th grade class. She has red hair in 2 braids and freckles across her nose. She's staring straight ahead, not acknowledging anyone. "Sit anywhere, Doctor," Leland says. Evan chooses the desk in the back left corner. On the desk, a booklet with a blank cover, a sharpened pencil, and a small plastic cup of water. The booklet has a number written in the corner, 7-03. Dr. Leland walks to the front of the room and stands behind a teacher's desk that's completely empty. No papers, no supplies, no personal items, just a clipboard and a red pen. "You have 90 minutes, she says. "Begin when I say so. Do not speak. Do not look at other students' work. If you need to use the restroom, raise your hand and wait. If you have a question, raise your hand and wait. Do not open the booklet until I tell you to begin." She pauses, looks at each child individually. When her eyes meet Evan's, he feels something cold slide down his spine. "Begin." Evan opens the booklet. The first section is normal, comforting even. Math problems, reading comprehension passages, vocabulary. He knows how to do this. He's been doing this kind of test since kindergarten. He works quickly, efficiently, finishing the first 10 pages in 18 minutes. Then the booklet changes. Page 11. A new section header, spatial reasoning. Below it, a series of geometric shapes. Circles, triangles, squares, hexagons, arranged in sequences. Beneath each sequence, a blank space with the instruction, complete the pattern. Evan looks at the first one. Circle, triangle, square, circle, triangle, square, circle, triangle. The answer is obviously square. He fills it in. The second one is harder. Triangle, circle, triangle, circle, triangle, square, triangle, circle, triangle, circle, triangle. He stares at it for 30 seconds before he sees it. The square appears every 6th position. The answer is square. He fills it in. The third one, square, circle, triangle, triangle, circle, square, square, circle, triangle, triangle, circle. This one takes him a minute. He draws it out on scratch paper, looking for the repetition. Finally he sees it. The pattern reverses at the midpoint. The answer is square. He fills it in. The fourth one, triangle, circle, square, circle, triangle, square, triangle, square, circle, triangle, circle, square, square, triangle. Evan stares at it. He tries different approaches. He looks for mathematical progressions, geometric relationships, colour coding. Nothing works. There is no pattern. It's random. It has to be random. But the instruction says, complete the pattern. He sits there for 3 minutes, pencil hovering over the blank space. And then, without knowing why, without thinking, he draws a triangle inside a circle. He doesn't know why it's correct, but he knows, absolutely, completely, certainly, that it is. He moves to the next section, page 16. A new section header, perceptual analysis. Below it, an instruction. Study the image below for exactly 30 seconds, then turn the page and answer the questions. Do not look back at the image once you have turned the page. The image is a black and white photograph. It looks old, grainy, slightly out of focus, like it was taken in the 1960s or 70s. It shows a room, empty except for a single wooden chair in the centre. The walls are bare concrete. There's a window on the left side, but the glass is dark. You can't see what's outside. In the bottom right corner there's a shadow, just barely visible, that might be a person standing outside the frame. Evan studies it. He counts in his head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. At 30 seconds he turns the page. Question 1. How many people were in the room when the photograph was taken? Evan blinks. He looks back at the instruction. Do not look back at the image. He can't check. He has to answer from memory. He thinks. There was the chair, the walls, the window, the shadow. Was the shadow a person? He wasn't sure. But the question asks how many people were in the room, not in the photograph. So even if the shadow was a person, they were outside the room. He writes 0. Question 2. What direction was the photographer facing? This should be impossible to answer. But Evan closes his eyes and visualises the photograph. The window was on the left. If the window was on the left and assuming the sun was... No, that's not how he knows. He just knows. He writes, north. Question 3. What was outside the window? He writes, a parking lot. He has no idea if these answers are correct, but he's absolutely certain they are. The test continues, each section stranger than the last. Probability assessment. A series of scenarios, a coin flip, a dice roll, a card drawn from a deck, where Evan is asked not to calculate the mathematical probability, but to predict the outcome. Temporal sequencing. A list of events scrambled out of order. Evan is asked to arrange them chronologically even though he's never heard of any of them. Example, the library burns, the mayor resigns, the investigation concludes, the reporter publishes the story. He arranges them in an order that feels right. Investigation, reporter, library, mayor. He doesn't know why. Emotional recognition. Photographs of faces with neutral expressions. Evan is asked to identify what emotion the person was feeling when the photo was taken. Not what emotion they're displaying, what they were feeling. He writes his answers. Afraid, angry, sad, hopeful. At page 38, the test ends. Dr. Leland collects the booklets without comment. As she passes Evan's desk, she pauses. Her eyes scan his answers. Then she picks up her red pen and draws a small mark in the upper right corner of his booklet. A triangle inside a circle. Evan doesn't see it. You're dismissed, Doctor, Leland says. Return to your classroom. Evan walks back across the dead grass, through the side door, down the hallway. When he reaches his classroom, it's 2 minutes before the final bell. Mrs. Patterson smiles at him, a warm, genuine smile, and says, How did it go? Fine, Evan says. But it wasn't fine. Something about the test felt wrong. Not difficult. Wrong. Like he'd been measured for something that shouldn't be measurable. That night, he dreams about the photograph, the empty room, the chair, the shadow. In the dream, the shadow moves. 3 weeks pass. Evan doesn't think about the test. Or rather, he tries not to think about the test. But it lingers at the edges of his consciousness like a song he can't get out of his head. Then, on a Monday in mid-May, Mrs. Patterson calls him to her desk before class starts. Evan, she says, her voice bright with manufactured enthusiasm, I have wonderful news. She hands him a large envelope. It's made of heavy cream-coloured paper with a gold seal in the corner. The return address reads, Orange County Department of Education, Advanced Learning Division. Open it, Mrs. Patterson says. Evan tears open the envelope. Inside, a letter printed on matching cream-coloured paper with a letterhead that features the California state seal. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Halbrook, it is our pleasure to inform you that your son, Evan Michael Halbrook, has been selected for enrolment in the Orange County Gifted and Talented Education Program. GATE. Based on his exceptional performance in cognitive assessment testing, Evan has demonstrated the aptitude and potential necessary for advanced academic enrichment. The GATE program is designed to challenge high-potential students and prepare them for academic excellence through specialised curriculum, advanced learning opportunities, and individualised instruction. Evan will begin attending GATE classes starting in the fall of the 1998-99 academic year. Programme participation will continue through 6th grade, with annual performance reviews to ensure continued appropriateness of placement. Please complete the attached enrolment forms and return them to the school office by June 1st, 1998. Congratulations to Evan on this outstanding achievement. Sincerely, Dr. Marjorie Leland, Director, Advanced Learning Division. Evan reads it twice. Mrs. Patterson is beaming at him. This is such an honour, Evan. Your parents must be so proud. That afternoon, when Evan gets home, his parents are proud. His mother frames the letter. His father calls his grandparents. They take him out to dinner to celebrate. Everyone tells him how special he is, how bright his future will be, how lucky he is to have this opportunity. Evan smiles and says, "Thank you." But that night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, he feels something he can't name. Not fear exactly, not dread. Unease, like he's been selected for something that has nothing to do with education. The GATE classroom is located in the same portable unit where Evan took the test. He reports there on the first day of 4th grade, carrying a new backpack and a lunchbox, and the vague sense that something fundamental has shifted in his life. The door is already unlocked. Inside, 11 other students are seated at desks arranged in a rough semicircle. No rows, no traditional classroom structure, just a circle like they're sitting around a campfire. Evan recognises some of them. Lena Crow, the red-haired girl from the test, a boy named Marcus Tate who barely ever speaks and always wears the same black hoodie, a girl named Sophie Ruiz who draws compulsively in the margins of every notebook. At the front of the room stands a man in his early 30s. He's wearing khakis and a blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, wire-rimmed glasses, beard trimmed neatly. He looks like every other elementary school teacher except for his eyes, which are sharp and assessing in a way that makes Evan uncomfortable. "Good morning," the man says. "My name is Mr. Calloway. Welcome to GATE." He doesn't smile. He doesn't make small talk. He doesn't do any of the normal first day of school things like asking students to share fun facts about themselves or playing icebreaker games. Instead, he says, "You're here because you're different. Not better. Not smarter. Different. You see patterns other people don't see. You understand systems other people don't understand. You know things before you're told, and we're going to figure out what that difference means and how to use it." He pauses, looks at each student individually. Some of you will find this exciting. Some of you will find uncomfortable. Both responses are valid. What's important is that you're honest, with me, with each other, and with yourselves. This program only works if you participate fully. A girl in the front row raises her hand. "What are we going to learn?" Mr. Calloway smiles, but it doesn't reach his eyes. "Everything that matters," he says. The GATE curriculum is unlike anything Evan has experienced. There are no textbooks, no worksheets, no spelling tests or multiplication tables. Instead, Mr. Calloway presents them with scenarios. You wake up in a room with no windows or doors. How do you get out? The students discuss. Some say, break through the wall. Some say, look for a hidden door. Some say, it's impossible. Evan says, stop imagining the room. Mr. Calloway writes that answer on the board. A stranger approaches you on the street and tells you not to go home. What do you do? Responses vary. Ignore them. Call the police. Ask why. Evan says, go home, but carefully. Another scenario. You wake up and the calendar says it's 3 years in the future. How do you verify that it's real? Check the news. Look at your ID. Ask someone. Evan says, try to remember something you can't have known 3 years ago. Mr. Calloway never tells them which answers are correct. He just writes them on the board and asks, which response is most adaptive? The students debate. They argue. They defend their reasoning. And all the while, Mr. Calloway watches, taking notes, recording everything. In late October, Mr. Calloway introduces a new activity. Today, we're going to practice silent communication, he says. He pairs the students off. Evan is paired with Lena Crow. They're told to move their desks so they're facing each other, knees almost touching, close enough that Evan can count the freckles on Lena's face. Eye contact, mister, Calloway says. Don't look away, don't speak, just look at each other and try to understand what the other person is thinking. For how long, someone asks. 10 minutes. A ripple of discomfort moves through the room. 10 minutes is an eternity when you're staring into another person's eyes. Mr. Calloway sets a timer. Begin. Evan looks at Lena. She looks back. Her eyes are pale green, almost grey, and they don't blink. At first it's merely awkward, then uncomfortable, then something else. Evan feels dizzy. The room seems to tilt. Lena's pupils dilate, expanding until they're huge black pools that seem to pull him in. He wants to look away. He can't. His vision begins to tunnel. All he can see are her eyes. All he can feel is a pressure building behind his own eyes, like something pushing outward from inside his skull. He thinks he hears something. A voice, distant and muffled, like someone speaking underwater. He can't make out the words. The timer rings. Evan gasps and looks away. His hands are shaking. His shirt is damp with sweat. Write down what you felt, Mr. Calloway says, handing out index cards. Evan writes, scared, dizzy. Heard a voice but couldn't understand it. He doesn't know what Lena writes. Mr. Calloway collects the cards without reading them aloud. That night, Evan has nightmares. He dreams he's back in the portable classroom, but the windows are covered with black plastic and the door won't open. He can hear voices outside, muffled, indistinct. But when he calls for help, no one answers. He wakes at 3 a.m. drenched in sweat, heart hammering against his ribs. In mid-November, Mr. Calloway hands out blank sheets of paper and coloured pencils. I want you to draw a place you've never been, he says. Close your eyes first. Don't think about it. Just let the image come to you. Draw what you see. Evan closes his eyes. For a long time, maybe 2 minutes, maybe 5, he sees nothing. Just darkness and the faint phosphine patterns that swim across your vision when your eyes are closed. Then, slowly, an image begins to form. A desert, flat and endless and the colour of bone. The sky's pale blue, washed out, empty of clouds. In the centre of the desert, a cluster of buildings, low, blocky structures made of concrete with no windows. They look military, utilitarian. Behind them, 3 massive structures rise into the sky. Radar domes. White and perfectly smooth and enormous. Each one at least 50 feet tall. The image is so vivid it's like looking at a photograph. Evan can see every detail. The shadows cast by the buildings. The heat shimmer rising from the sand. Even the texture of the concrete. He opens his eyes and draws. He works for 15 minutes using browns and yellows and greys. When he's finished, the drawing looks exactly like the image in his mind. The buildings, the domes, the empty sky. Mister. Calloway walks through the classroom, glancing at each student's drawing. When he reaches Evan's desk, he stops. Stares. His expression doesn't change, but Evan sees his hand tighten around his clipboard. Evan, Mr. Calloway says quietly, where did you see this? I didn't, Evan says. I imagined it. Have you ever been to the desert? Once. We went to Palm Springs, but it didn't look like this. Mr. Calloway nods slowly. He picks up Evan's drawing, folds it carefully in half and places it in his clipboard. Thank you, he says. Evan never sees the drawing again. To understand what happened to Evan Halbrook and the other children in Cohort 7, you have to go back 51 years, to a launch pad in Kazakhstan. to a moment that changed everything. October 4th, 1957. The Soviet Union launches Sputnik 1, the world's first artificial satellite. It's a metal sphere, 23 inches in diameter, weighing 184 pounds. 4 radio antennas trail behind it like the legs of an insect. It orbits Earth every 96 minutes, broadcasting a simple radio signal, beep, beep, beep. In the United States, that beeping sound triggers a crisis. Americans turn on their radios and hear the signal coming from space. They walk outside at night and see the satellite passing overhead, a bright point of light moving across the stars faster than anything has a right to move, and they realize, with sudden and absolute clarity, that they are behind. The Soviet Union, backward, agrarian, devastated by World War II, has beaten America into space. If the Soviets can put a satellite in orbit, they can put a nuclear warhead anywhere. Moscow is 8 hours ahead of Washington. By the time American radar detects a Soviet missile, it will be too late. The Cold War, already simmering, erupts into a full-scale technological arms race that will define the next 3 decades. But the race isn't just about rockets and bombs and satellites, it's about minds. The American government becomes obsessed with a single question: are we falling behind intellectually? President Eisenhower addresses the nation. He says, "The Soviets have demonstrated superior scientific achievement. We must respond not with panic, but with resolve. We must invest in education. We must identify and train the brightest minds of the next generation. The future of the free world depends on it." Congress acts quickly. In 1958, they passed the National Defense Education Act, funneling millions of dollars into science and mathematics education. Schools across the country begin administering standardized tests, looking for children with high IQs, strong problem-solving skills, advanced reasoning abilities. The logic is simple. Find the smartest kids. Give them the best education. Train them to become the scientists, engineers and strategists who will keep America ahead of the Soviet Union. By the 1970s, gifted education programs, often called GATE or TAG, talented and gifted, are standard in most American school districts. Millions of children are tested every year. Hundreds of thousands are identified as gifted. For most of them, it's legitimate. Advanced coursework, creative enrichment, academic challenges, nothing sinister, but not all of them. Because buried inside the infrastructure of gifted education, hidden within the bureaucracy of school districts and state education offices and federal funding streams, is something else. A secondary screening process, a pipeline, and it's connected to programs that, officially, don't exist. In 1972, the Central Intelligence Agency initiates a classified program called Project Stargate. The goal? Determine whether human beings possess extrasensory perception, ESP, and if so, weaponize it. The program is born from panic. American intelligence agencies receive reports that the Soviet Union is conducting parapsychology research, attempting to develop psychic spies who can read minds, view remote locations and predict future events. The Soviets claim they've achieved breakthroughs. They claim their psychics can penetrate American military facilities without leaving Moscow. The CIA doesn't know if these claims are true, but they can't afford to be wrong. So they launch their own program. For over 2 decades, from 1972 to 1995, the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency fund experiments in remote viewing, the ability to perceive distant locations without physical presence, precognition, predicting future events before they occur, telepathy, mind-to-mind communication without speaking or gestures, psychokinesis, influencing physical objects through thought alone. The experiments are conducted at military installations like Fort Meade, Maryland, and research facilities like Stanford Research Institute in California. Participants include military personnel, civilian volunteers, and, in some cases, children. The methodology varies. Some experiments use sensory deprivation tanks to induce altered states of consciousness. Some use meditation and biofeedback training. Some use drugs, LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, to enhance perceptual abilities. The results are mixed. Some subjects demonstrate abilities that defy statistical probability. A remote viewer describes a Soviet military facility in Siberia with 87% accuracy, despite never having been within 3,000 miles of the location. A precognition subject predicts the outcome of random number generation with success rates far beyond chance. A telepath transmits information to another subject in a separate building with no possible means of communication, but other subjects show nothing. No abilities, no anomalies, just ordinary human cognition. The program is plagued by inconsistency. Sometimes the psychics are accurate, sometimes they're not. The intelligence community can't rely on information that's only correct some of the time. In 1995, the CIA officially terminates Project Stargate. The conclusion: remote viewing and other paranormal phenomena are not sufficiently reliable for intelligence applications. The program is shut down, the files are archived, the psychics are sent home, but termination doesn't mean deletion. To understand what happened next, you need to know about MK Ultra. MK Ultra was the CIA's mind control program, active from 1953 to 1973. The goal: develop techniques to control human behavior, extract information from unwilling subjects, and create programmable assassins. The experiments were horrific. The CIA dosed unsuspecting civilians with LSD, conducted electroshock therapy on psychiatric patients without consent, developed torture techniques, and tested chemical interrogation methods. At least one subject died. Many more were permanently damaged. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms learned that Congress was about to investigate. He issued an order: destroy all MK Ultra records. Most were burned or shredded, but not all of them. A handful of documents survived, discovered years later in financial records that hadn't been flagged for destruction. Among them, a memo dated August 19th, 1973, from Director Helms to the Deputy Director of Plans. Subject: Post-MK Continuation Protocols. The memo reads: following termination of MK Ultra operational activities, remaining cognitive research assets will be transitioned to civilian oversight structures. Direct military and intelligence agency involvement presents unacceptable oversight risk. Educational infrastructure provides optimal cover for continuation of juvenile cognition trials. Recommend establishment of liaison protocols with Department of Education. Program codename Gateway. The memo is 3 pages long. Most of it is redacted, but the implication is clear. When MKUltra ended, the research didn't stop. It moved into the one place where no one would think to look: schools. Throughout the 1980s, gifted education programs expand rapidly across the United States. Federal funding increases, more schools adopt GATE programs, more children are tested. On the surface, it's a success story. American education is identifying and nurturing talented students. The next generation of scientists and engineers is being prepared. But beneath the surface, something else is happening. Certain school districts receive additional funding from unusual sources, not just the Department of Education, but also the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, the Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, the National Security Agency, NSA. The funding is buried in grant programs with innocuous names: Advanced Learning Research Initiative, Cognitive Development Enhancement Program, Strategic Education Investment. The money funds additional testing beyond standard IQ assessments, specialized curriculum development, enrichment activities at off-site facilities, longitudinal tracking of student outcomes. Most teachers don't know about the secondary funding. Most administrators don't know. The programs look like normal gifted education, advanced math, science enrichment, creative problem solving. But a small subset of students, identified through the secondary testing, are flagged for something different. They're sent to summer programs, leadership institutes, academic camps, all expenses paid, all highly selective, and the children who attend these programs begin to notice something strange. The activities don't feel educational, they feel like experiments. Evan is 9 years old when the letter arrives. It's June 5th, 1999. School has been out for exactly 1 week. He's sitting on the couch watching cartoons when his mother walks into the living room holding a large envelope. "Evan," she says, her voice tight with excitement, "you need to see this." The envelope is made of heavy cardstock, cream-coloured, with a gold seal embossed in the corner. The return address reads, National Youth Leadership Institute, Washington, D.C. Evan opens it. Evan. Inside, a letter printed on matching cardstock. The kind of paper that feels expensive when you touch it. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Halbrook, congratulations. Your son, Evan Michael Halbrook, has been selected to participate in the National Youth Leadership Institute's summer residential program for academically exceptional students. Selection is based on Evan's outstanding performance in standardized assessments and advanced learning programs. This is a highly competitive program with an acceptance rate below 3%. The 2-week residential program will take place June 27th through July 10th at our facility in Arizona. Students will participate in leadership development activities, team-building exercises, and advanced cognitive training designed to prepare them for future academic and professional success. All expenses are covered, including transportation, room and board, and program materials. This opportunity is provided at no cost to participating families. If Evan chooses to accept this opportunity, please complete the attached enrolment forms and return them by June 15th. We look forward to working with your exceptional son. Sincerely, Dr. Marjorie Leland, Program Director. Evan's mother is beaming. This is incredible, honey. Only 3% of students are accepted. You must have really impressed them in your GATE program. Evan's father reads the letter over her shoulder. Arizona in July. It'll be hot, but this is too good an opportunity to pass up. What do you think, Evan? Evan stares at the letter. Dr. Marjorie Leland, the same woman who tested him, the same woman who runs the GATE program. Something about this feels wrong. I don't want to go, Evan says quietly. His mother's smile falters. What? Honey, this is a huge honour. You'd be learning leadership skills, meeting other gifted students. I don't want to go. His father frowns. Why not? Evan doesn't have an answer. Not one that makes sense. Just a feeling in his gut, cold and heavy like swallowing a stone. I just don't want to. His parents exchange glances. His mother kneels down beside him, takes his hand. Evan, I understand it might be scary to be away from home for 2 weeks, but this is a wonderful opportunity. You'll regret it if you don't go. Evan looks at the letter again, at Dr. Leland's name, at the gold seal. He wants to say no, but he's 9 years old, and when adults tell you something is a wonderful opportunity, you don't really have a choice. Okay, he says quietly, I'll go. His mother hugs him. You're going to have an amazing time. But Evan knows, somewhere deep in his bones, in a place that doesn't have words, that this is the beginning of something he won't be able to escape. The van picks him up at 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning. It's white with tinted windows and no markings. The driver's a man in his 40s wearing a polo shirt and khakis. He doesn't introduce himself. There are 5 other children already inside. Evan doesn't recognise any of them. They're all around his age, 9, maybe 10. Nobody speaks. They just stare out the windows as the van pulls away from Evan's house. They drive for 5 hours, through Orange County, through the Inland Empire, through the desert. The landscape changes from suburban sprawl to agricultural fields to empty wasteland. Brown dirt and scrub brush and telephone poles marching toward the horizon. Eventually they turn off the highway onto a smaller road, then onto a dirt road, then through a checkpoint with armed guards and a gate and a sign that reads, Fort Huachuca, U.S. Army Installation, Authorized Personnel Only. The van is waved through. Fort Huachuca is enormous. Rows of identical buildings painted the same tan colour as the desert. Soldiers in digital camouflage marching in formation. Helicopters taking off and landing, their rotor wash kicking up clouds of dust. Evan presses his face against the window watching. They drive to the far edge of the base, past the barracks and training facilities, to a cluster of buildings that look different from the others. Newer, more modern. White concrete instead of tan. No windows. The van stops in front of the largest building. The driver opens the door. "Out," he says. The children climb out. The heat hits Evan like a physical force, dry and searing, sucking the moisture from his lungs. It must be 110 degrees. A woman is waiting at the entrance. She's wearing civilian clothes, a blue polo shirt and khakis, but she stands like military personnel, spine straight, shoulders back, hands clasped behind her back. "Welcome to the National Youth Leadership Institute," she says. Her voice is flat, emotionless, like she's reading from a script. "My name is Ms. Torres. Over the next 2 weeks you will participate in activities designed to enhance your cognitive and perceptual abilities. You will be challenged. Some exercises may feel uncomfortable. That discomfort is normal and necessary for growth. Trust the process. Follow instructions. Do not discuss the activities with anyone outside this facility. Do you understand?" The children nod. "Good. Follow me." They follow her inside. The building is cold, air conditioning running full blast, dropping the temperature from 110 outside to maybe 60 inside. Evan's skin breaks out in goosebumps. They walk down a long hallway with white walls and fluorescent lights and doors on both sides, all of them closed. At the end of the hallway, Miss Torres opens a door on the right and gestures for them to enter. It's a dormitory. 6 bunk beds arranged along the walls, lockers, a shared bathroom, no windows. "This is where you'll sleep," Ms. Torres says. Lights out at 9 p.m. Wake up is 6 a.m. Meals are communal. You'll eat in the cafeteria with the other cohorts. Do not leave this building unless accompanied by staff. Do not attempt to access restricted areas. Any violation of these rules will result in immediate dismissal from the program and forfeiture of the opportunity. She leaves without another word. The children stand in silence for a moment. Then one of them, a boy with dark hair and glasses, says, "I want to go home." Evan does too, but he doesn't say it out loud. The first exercise takes place on day 2. After breakfast, oatmeal, orange juice, toast. The children are led to a different building. This one is underground. They descend a staircase that seems to go down forever, fluorescent lights flickering overhead, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, a door opens into a large room. White walls, white floor, white ceiling, and in the centre of the room, a sensory deprivation tank. It looks like a coffin, or a giant egg. A smooth fiberglass shell, 8 feet long and 4 feet wide, filled with water. The water is perfectly still, reflecting the overhead lights like a mirror. Ms. Torres stands beside the tank. "This exercise is designed to enhance perceptual awareness," she says. "The tank contains water saturated with Epsom salt, which will allow you to float effortlessly. The temperature is calibrated to match your body temperature, 94.5 degrees Fahrenheit, so that after a few minutes you won't be able to distinguish where your body ends and the water begins. There is no light, no sound, no external stimuli, just you and your thoughts." She looks at each child. The experience may be disorienting. Some subjects report visual or auditory hallucinations. This is normal. Your brain, deprived of external input, will generate its own stimuli. Do not be alarmed. You will be monitored at all times. If you experience severe distress, knock on the inside of the tank and you will be removed immediately. She pauses. "Who wants to go first?" No one volunteers. "You," Miss Torres says, pointing at Evan, "strip down to your underwear and climb in." Evan's heart is pounding. He doesn't want to do this, but he doesn't have a choice. He undresses. The other children look away. He approaches the tank. Miss Torres opens the lid. It swings upward on hydraulic hinges, and Evan climbs in. The water is warm, thick. The salt concentration is so high that he floats immediately, his body rising to the surface without effort. He lies back. His ears are submerged. The world becomes muffled. "Lie still," Miss Torres says. "Try not to move. Just float." The lid closes. Darkness. Complete. Absolute. Darkness. At first, Evan tries to stay calm. He counts in his head. 1, 2, 3, 4. He tries to keep track of time, but within minutes, time stops making sense. Has he been in here for 5 minutes? 15? An hour? His thoughts begin to fracture. He thinks about his parents. He thinks about school. He thinks about the gate classroom. The thoughts come faster, overlapping, fragmenting. Then he starts to see things. Not with his eyes. His eyes are open, but there's nothing to see. He sees things in his mind. Geometric patterns, fractals, spiralling shapes that pulse and shift. Then he sees people. A woman, standing in a room. She's holding a clipboard. She's wearing a white coat. She's looking at something. A screen, maybe a monitor. Her lips are moving. Evan tries to focus. He tries to see what's on the screen. And then the woman turns, looks directly at him, as if she knows he's watching. "Can you see me?" she asks. Evan tries to answer, but he has no body, no mouth, no voice. He's just awareness, floating in a void. The woman smiles. "Good," she says, and then Evan is pulled out. The lid opens, light floods in, blinding and painful. Hands grab his arms, haul him out of the tank. He's shaking, gasping. His skin is cold despite the warm water. Ms. Torres is standing over him, holding a stopwatch. 90 minutes, she says. She hands him a towel. "Get dressed." Evan wraps the towel around his shoulders. His hands are trembling. "I saw something," he says. Ms. Torres writes something on her clipboard. "What did you see?" "A woman, in a room. She asked if I could see her." Miss Torres doesn't react, just writes. "Good," she says. "Next." The next exercise is called spatial cognition mapping. The children are taken to another room, this one above ground, with natural light streaming through windows high on the walls. In the centre of the room, a maze constructed from movable partitions, each partition about 7 feet tall and covered in grey fabric. "This exercise tests your ability to navigate without visual input, Miss," Torres explains. "You will be blindfolded and placed at the entrance to the maze. Your task is to navigate from the entrance to the exit using only your internal sense of direction. No touching the walls, no feeling your way along. You must walk as if you can see." She holds up a black cloth. "Who's first?" Again no volunteers. "You," she says, pointing at Evan. Evan steps forward. Miss Torres ties the blindfold around his head, tight enough that no light seeps in. The world disappears. "Step into the maze," Miss Torres says. Evan takes a step forward. His hands are outstretched, instinctively reaching for something to hold on to. "No hands," Miss Torres says. "Walk as if you can see." Evan lowers his hands. He takes another step, then another. He has no idea where he is. He turns left, or maybe right. He's already disoriented. He walks forward. 5 steps, 10 steps. He should have hit a wall by now, but he hasn't. He turns again, walks forward, and then suddenly he knows. Not thinks, knows. He knows the maze. He can see it in his mind. Not the physical structure, but the shape of it, the pattern, the flow. He turns right, walks 15 paces, turns left, walks 10 more, turns right again, walks 5, and stops. He reaches out. His hand touches a doorknob. He turns it. Light floods in. He's at the exit. Miss Torres is standing there, stopwatch in hand. Her expression doesn't change, but Evan sees something flicker in her eyes. Surprise? Satisfaction? "How did you know?" she asks. Evan pulls off the blindfold. "I don't know," he says. "I just knew." Ms. Torres writes something on her clipboard. "Excellent," she says. On the final day of the programme, July 10th, 1999, the children are taken to a computer lab. It's a large room with 20 workstations, each with a desktop computer and a padded chair. The computers are old, beige towers with CRT monitors, Windows 98 loading screens flickering to life. This is your final assessment, Ms. Torres says. You will complete a probability forecasting exercise. The computer will present you with scenarios, hypothetical situations. Your task is to predict the outcome, not guess. Predict. Trust your instincts. Work quickly. You have 60 minutes. She hands each child a number printed on a card. Evan's number is 7. Sit at the station corresponding to your number, Ms. Torres says. Begin when the timer starts. Evan sits at station 7. The monitor flickers. A dialog box appears. Cognitive Assessment Protocol. Probability Forecasting. Subject. ID 07-0. 3-9-8 date. July 10th, 1999. Begin assessment Y/N. Evan clicks Y. The first scenario appears. A man enters a grocery store at 3:15 p.m. on a Wednesday. The store has 12 aisles. The man is 34 years old, wearing jeans and a blue t-shirt. He's carrying a reusable shopping bag. Will he purchase milk? 2 buttons, yes and no. Evan stares at the screen. This should be impossible to answer. There's no way to know. It's random. But he knows. He clicks no. The next scenario. Flight 447 departs Los Angeles International Airport at 6:30 a.m., bound for Chicago O'Hare. The flight is scheduled to arrive at 12:45 p.m. Central Time. Weather conditions are clear. Will the flight arrive on time? Evan clicks no. The scenarios come faster. A political leader gives a speech at a rally. The crowd is 30,000 people. Will the speech result in violence? Yes. A woman finds a wallet on the sidewalk. The wallet contains $217 and a driver's license. Will she return it to the owner? No. A child takes a math test. The test has 30 questions. The child has studied for 2 hours. Will the child score above 80%? Yes. On and on. Dozens of scenarios. Evan doesn't think. He just clicks. The answers come to him fully formed. Absolute. Certain. When the timer runs out, the screen goes black. A message appears. Assessment complete. Remain seated. Miss Torres walks through the room, checking each workstation. When she reaches Evan's computer, she plugs a USB drive into the tower and downloads something. Then she moves to the next station. 5 minutes later, she returns to the front of the room. Congratulations, she says. You've completed the National Youth Leadership Institute program. You will be transported back to your homes tomorrow morning. Thank you for your participation. That night, lying in his bunk, Evan stares at the ceiling and thinks about the test. He'll never know his score. But years later, decades later, when he finally accesses his records, he'll discover that he was correct 89% of the time. A statistical impossibility. Evan is 11 years old, 6th grade. It's a Tuesday morning, sunny and warm, the kind of California day where the sky's so blue it hurts to look at. First period, math class. Evan is working on a worksheet when the intercom crackles to life. Attention all students and staff. Please report to the multi-purpose room immediately for an emergency assembly. All classes are suspended until further notice. The classroom erupts in confused chatter. Emergency assembly. What happened? They file into the multi-purpose room. The entire school, 400 students packed onto the floor, sitting cross-legged, whispering. The teachers stand along the walls, their faces grim. The principal, Dr. Hammond, stands at the front of the room. He's holding a microphone. He looks like he hasn't slept. Students, he says, his voice echoing over the speakers. Something terrible has happened this morning. There has been an attack on our country. Planes have crashed into buildings in New York City and Washington, D.C. Many people have been hurt. Many have died. The room is silent. We don't know all the details yet, Doctor. Hammond continues. But we want you to know that you are safe here. Your parents are being notified. Some of you may be picked up early. For now, we ask that you stay calm and stay together. The assembly ends. The students are herded back to their classrooms, but nobody can focus. The teachers turn on the television, and everyone watches in silence as the twin towers burn. At noon, the intercom crackles again. Will the following students please report to the gate portable? Evan Halbrook, Lena Crow, Marcus Tate, Sophie Ruiz. The list continues. 12 names, the entire gate cohort. Evan walks across the playground, past groups of students sitting on the grass, crying. The portable classroom door is open. Mr. Calloway is inside, standing at the front of the room. "Sit down," he says. The 12 students sit. "Mr." Calloway closes the door. "I know today has been difficult," he says. "What happened in New York is a tragedy. But I want you to understand something important. The world is changing, and we need people who can help us understand how it will change." He hands out blank sheets of paper. "I want you to write down your predictions," he says. Not guesses, predictions. What will happen next? What will the world look like in 1 year, in 2 years, in 5 years? Write down everything that comes to mind, the students write. Evan closes his eyes. Images flash through his mind. A desert, soldiers, burning oil fields, a statue being pulled down, explosions, smoke, chaos. He writes, "The United States will invade Iraq within 2 years. The war will last more than a decade. Thousands of American soldiers will die. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians will die. The Middle East will destabilize. New terrorist organizations will emerge. The conflict will spread. He doesn't know how he knows, but he's certain." Mr. Calloway collects the papers. "Thank you," he says. "You can go." On March 19th, 2003, exactly 18 months after Evan wrote his prediction, the United States invades Iraq. Evan is 13 years old. He's sitting in his living room watching CNN when the first bombs fall on Baghdad. The sky lights up. Explosions bloom across the screen. Reporters describe the beginning of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Evan feels something cold settle in his stomach. He was right. Middle school, 8th grade. Evan is 14 years old when he receives another letter from the GATE program. It arrives in a plain white envelope, no gold seal this time. The letterhead reads, Orange County Educational Research Partnership. Dear Evan, as part of our ongoing commitment to understanding cognitive development in gifted students, we are conducting a research study in partnership with the University of California. The study involves non-invasive brain imaging to better understand how advanced learners process information. We are inviting select GATE students to participate. The procedure is simple. You will undergo an fMRI scan while completing cognitive tasks similar to those you've done in class. The entire process takes approximately 90 minutes. Participation is voluntary but highly encouraged. All data will be kept confidential and used solely for educational research purposes. If you're interested in participating, please have your parents sign the attached consent form. Sincerely, Dr. Marjorie Leland Evans' parents think it's a wonderful opportunity. They're studying how your brain works, his mother says. This could help other gifted kids. Evan signs the form. 3 weeks later, he's lying inside an fMRI machine at a research facility adjacent to UC Irvine. The machine is a massive white tube that hums and clicks and makes sounds like industrial machinery. Evan wears headphones. A screen is positioned above his face. A voice comes through the headphones. We're going to show you a series of images. Just look at them. Don't try to analyze. Just observe. The images flash on the screen. Geometric patterns, photographs of faces, sequences of numbers, random shapes. Then the voice says, "Now we're going to show you scenarios. Predict the outcome before it's revealed." A scenario appears. A car approaches an intersection. The light is yellow. Will the driver stop or continue? Evan predicts, "Continue." The answer appears, "Continue." Another scenario. A child drops a glass. Will it break? Evan predicts, "Yes." The answer, "Yes." On and on. Dozens of scenarios. Evan's predictions are correct 86% of the time. When the scan finishes, a technician helps him out of the machine. "Great job," the technician says. "Your brain activity was fascinating." Evan asks, "What did you see?" The technician hesitates. "I can't discuss specific results, but your prefrontal cortex was activating before the scenarios appeared on screen. Like your brain was making decisions before you consciously received the information. Is that normal?" "No," the technician says quietly, "it's not." Over the next 2 years, Evan undergoes 3 more scans. Each time the same pattern emerges. His brain makes decisions milliseconds before he's consciously aware of making them. His neural activity predicts outcomes before they occur. The researchers never explain why. They just take their data and thank him for his participation. Years later, when Evan finally accesses his medical records, he'll discover that every scan was funded by DARPA through a grant titled Predictive Neural Architecture in Juvenile Subjects, Applications for Strategic Intelligence. Evan is 15 when Lena Crow dies. It's October 7th, 2005, a Friday night. Lena is driving home from a friend's house on a straight, empty road in Yorba Linda. No traffic, no rain, clear visibility. Her car veers off the road at 70 miles per hour and hits a telephone pole head-on. She dies instantly. The police report notes no skid marks, no evidence of braking, no mechanical failure, no drugs or alcohol in her system. The official conclusion: driver error. Possibly fell asleep. Evan attends the funeral. He stands in the back of the church watching Lena's parents sob over a closed casket. He remembers the silent communication exercise, her pale green eyes, the voice he heard but couldn't understand. Something feels wrong about her death, but he doesn't know what. A year later, Marcus Tate dies. November the 12th, 2006. Marcus is 19, attending community college. He jumps from the roof of a parking garage in downtown Anaheim. 4 stories, no witnesses, no suicide note. His parents tell the newspaper he'd been struggling with depression, but Evan remembers Marcus differently. Quiet, yes, but not depressed. Contemplative, thoughtful. At the funeral, Evan sits next to Sophie Ruiz. She's crying. "This doesn't make sense," she whispers. "Marcus was planning to transfer to Berkeley. He was excited about it. Why would he—" She doesn't finish the sentence. Sophie Ruiz dies 8 months later. July 23rd, 2007. She's 19 years old, enrolled in Army ROTC at Cal State Fullerton. She's participating in a summer training exercise at Fort Benning, Georgia, a routine navigation drill in wooded terrain. She falls from a cliff, 40-foot drop, broken neck, dead before the medics arrive. The Army's investigation concludes accidental death, lost her footing on wet rocks. But when Evan reads the report years later, he notices something strange. Sophie fell during daylight hours, on a clear day, on a trail she'd hiked successfully 3 times that week. And she fell in the opposite direction from the trail, like she'd walked deliberately toward the cliff edge. By 2007, 5 members of Cohort 7 are dead. Lena Crow, car accident. Marcus Tate, apparent suicide. Sophie Ruiz, training accident. Daniel Chen, drowned in a swimming pool at a party. Excellent swimmer. Ashley Morrison, house fire, only victim. Fire started in a bedroom. Smoke alarm batteries removed. Evan starts keeping a list. He writes down every name he remembers from the GATE program. He tracks them down through social media, yearbooks, public records. Of the original 32 students in Cohort 7, 14 are dead by 2010. The pattern is undeniable and impossible to prove. Evan is 34 years old. He works as a data analyst for a tech company in San Diego. He's good at his job: pattern recognition, statistical modelling, predictive algorithms. The skills come naturally, almost too naturally. He hasn't thought about GATE in years, or rather he's tried not to think about it. But the memories linger like scars that ache when the weather changes. Then, On a Tuesday night in late January, he's scrolling through Reddit when he finds it. A post in a conspiracy theory subreddit titled, "Anyone else remember GATE program acting weird?" The post reads, "I was in GATE in the 90s, Southern California. Anyone else remember the exercises being off? Like not actually educational, more like psychological tests, sensory deprivation, probability prediction? Anyone else remember being sent to summer programs at military bases? Or is this just me?" The post has 273 comments. Evan reads them all. "Oh my god, yes! I thought I was crazy. They made us stare into each other's eyes for 10 minutes. I remember drawing a place I'd never been, and the teacher took my drawing and I never saw it again. They asked us to predict the future, like literally predict things that hadn't happened yet. I went to a summer program at Fort Huachuca. They put me in a sensory deprivation tank. I was 9 years old." Evan's hands are shaking. He creates a Reddit account. He writes, "I was in Cohort 7, Orange County, 1998 to 2002. Everything you described happened to me too. I've been trying to forget it for 20 years, but I can't anymore." Within an hour, 17 people have sent him direct messages. One message stands out. It's from a user named Dr. Nina P. "Evan, if you're serious about investigating this, we need to talk. I was in GATE 2, different cohort but same program. I became a neuroscientist specifically to understand what they did to us. I have evidence. We should meet." Evan responds, "Where?" They meet at a coffee shop in Oakland, California. Dr. Nina Patel is 33 years old with short black hair, sharp brown eyes, and the exhausted look of someone who hasn't slept well in months. She sits down across from Evan without preamble. "I've been tracking former GATE students for 5 years," she says. "I found 267 people who went through programs similar to ours, different cities, different states, but the same exercises, the same testing, the same summer programs. And," Evan asks, "47 of them are dead. The mortality rate for former GATE students is 3.2 times higher than the general population. Most deaths occur between ages 18 and 25. The causes are listed as accidents, suicides, or unexplained medical events." Evan's throat is dry. "Lena, Marcus, Sophie." Nina nods. "I knew them. Not personally, but their names are in the database. Cohort 7 had the highest attrition rate of any cohort I've tracked. 56% mortality by 2015. Why? I don't know, but I have a theory." She pulls out her laptop. "I scanned my own brain last year. Functional MRI. I was running baseline cognition tests, pattern recognition, decision-making, probability prediction. And I found something." She turns the screen toward Evan. It shows a cross-section of a human brain, lit up in false colour, reds and yellows and blues marking different regions of activity. "See this?" She points to a region in the prefrontal cortex. "This is where executive function happens. Planning, decision-making, impulse control. In most people, this area activates after they're presented with a stimulus. They see a problem, then their brain decides how to respond." She zooms in on the image. "In my brain, this area activates before the stimulus appears. Milliseconds before. My brain is making decisions before I'm consciously aware there's a decision to make." Evan stares at the image. "That's impossible." "That's what I thought. So I tested other people. Former GATE students I tracked down. Same pattern. All of us. Our brains are wired differently. We process information before it arrives. We make predictions before we have data. We know things before we should be able to know them. They were looking for this. They were creating this," Nina says. "The exercises, the testing, the sensory deprivation, the probability forecasting. They were training our brains to process information in non-linear ways, to predict outcomes, to see patterns that don't exist yet." "Why would they do that?" Nina closes her laptop. "Because the intelligence community has a problem. Traditional intelligence gathering, human sources, signals intercepts, satellite imagery is reactive. By the time analysts identify a threat, it's often too late. What they need is anticipatory intelligence, the ability to predict threats before they materialize. And they think we can do that. I think they know we can do that. The question is, at what cost? 2 weeks after meeting Nina, Evan receives an email from an anonymous sender. The subject line reads, "You're asking the right questions." The email contains a single attachment, a PDF document 47 pages long titled Cognitive Asset Development Initiative, Operational Summary, Fiscal Year 2004. Evan opens it. The document is a program review, written in the sterile language of government bureaucracy. It describes a multi-year project jointly funded by the Department of Education, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, and the Office of Naval Intelligence. The stated goal: identify and develop juveniles demonstrating enhanced anticipatory cognition for future integration into strategic intelligence operations. The document lists testing criteria: pattern recognition, exceeding 95th percentile, demonstrable intuitive decision-making under uncertainty, emotional regulation during high-stress scenarios, neural synchronization during group tasks. It describes Phase 1 as identification, using standardized testing within public school gifted programs to screen millions of children. Phase 2 is described as development, targeted cognitive enhancement exercises conducted at select sites, including Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and Tonopah Test Range, Nevada. Phase 3 is listed as redacted. At the bottom of the document, a signature: Thomas Kessler, Program Director, CADI. Evan searches for the name. Thomas Kessler, former contractor with the Department of Education. Current status: retired. Living in Arlington, Virginia. Evan sends him a LinkedIn message. I was in Gate. Cohort 7. I have questions. 3 days later, Kessler responds, "Meet me in person. No phones, no recordings. Come alone. I'll tell you everything." They meet in a public park. Kessler is 68 years old, grey-haired, wearing a windbreaker despite the mild March weather. He looks over his shoulder 3 times before sitting on the bench beside Evan. "You shouldn't be digging into this," Kessler says without preamble. "I need to know what you did to us." Kessler sighs. He looks old, tired. "You were part of an experiment, a very expensive, very secretive experiment. The goal was to determine whether certain cognitive abilities, precognition, intuitive threat detection, enhanced pattern recognition, could be identified in childhood and developed through targeted intervention. Why children? Because adult brains are already formed. Neural plasticity peaks in childhood. If you wanted to rewire cognition, you had to start early." "Did it work?" Kessler hesitates. "Depends what you mean by work. Some of you demonstrated abilities that defied statistical explanation, predictive accuracy rates that were unsettling, but the program was terminated in 2006. Why? Ethical exposure risk. Too many parents asking questions. Too many kids showing psychological trauma. And..." He pauses. "Too many deaths." Evan's blood runs cold. "You knew." "We knew there were side effects. Neural modification sometimes caused instability, depression, anxiety, paranoia. Some subjects couldn't handle what they were seeing. Information overload, basically. They knew too much, felt too much, and their brains couldn't process it. So you just let them die?" "We didn't let them." Kessler stops, rubs his face. "The cost-benefit analysis didn't justify continuation, so they shut it down in 2006, archived the data, dissolved the infrastructure. But you kept monitoring us. Passive surveillance, academic records, medical data, employment history. They wanted to see if the effects persisted into adulthood." Evan's hands are clenched into fists. "We were children. I know. You helped them do this. I know." Kessler looks at him. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to know, and because..." He hesitates. "Because it might be starting again." "What?" "I don't have proof, but I've heard things. A new program, different name, same goals. They learned from the mistakes of CADI. They're being more careful this time, more selective, better protocols. When? I don't know, but if you're experiencing anything unusual, dreams, visions, predictions that come true, you need to be careful, because that means they're watching, and if they think you're useful, he trails off. What happens if they think I'm useful? Kessler stands. They activate you. Evan can't let it go. The drawing, the image from his childhood, the desert facility with the radar domes. It's haunted him for 26 years. He starts searching satellite imagery, Google Earth, government databases. He inputs coordinates for areas near Fort Huachuca, expanding the search radius in concentric circles, and then he finds it. 37 miles northwest of Fort Huachuca, near the edge of the Tonopah Test Range in Nevada, there's a cluster of buildings, low concrete structures, no windows, and behind them 3 massive radar domes, white and smooth, exactly as he drew them when he was 9 years old. The facility is listed in government records as a decommissioned education research annex. The last recorded activity, 2012. Evan downloads every satellite image he can find. He cross-references entry logs from declassified documents. Visitors to the site between 1998 and 2012 included Department of Defense personnel, DARPA contractors, Office of Naval Intelligence officers, educational psychologist Dr. Marjorie Leland, 17 documented visits. He finds archived video footage, grainy, recorded on a camcorder in 2006. It shows children in a white room sitting in a circle wearing headphones. They're staring at a projection screen showing images of disasters, floods, fires, explosions, terrorist attacks. The children are given tablets. They're asked to rank the probability of each event occurring within the next 6 months. When the results are compiled, the collective accuracy rate is 87% above baseline statistical probability. One child is identified in the footage by name, Evan Halbrook. He doesn't remember being there, but he recognises his own face. In late January 2025, Evan starts having dreams, not normal dreams, vivid, hyper-detailed visions that feel more real than waking life. He dreams of a city, burning, smoke rising into a red sky, people running, sirens wailing, buildings collapsing. He wakes up at 3 a.m, heart pounding, and writes it down. Major city, fire, chaos, mass evacuation, soon. 3 days later, he receives a message on the Reddit Gate forum from Nina. Are you dreaming? He calls her immediately. I've been having the same dream, she says. A city on fire, chaos, people running. It started 2 weeks ago, and I'm not the only one. I've gotten messages from 12 other people, all former GATE students, all having the same vision. What does it mean? I don't know, but it started right after a classified DARPA project was activated. I have a friend in defence contracting. She told me there's a new initiative, something involving predictive AI and human cognition integration. It launched January 1st. They're activating us. I think they are. Over the next 3 months, the dreams intensify. Evan sees the same symbols over and over, triangles inside circles, geometric patterns, sequences of numbers, 22825. Other cohort members report the same thing. They're all seeing the same symbols, drawing them, dreaming them. Nina runs tests. She scans the brains of 6 former GATE students while they sleep. Their brainwaves are synchronized, not similar, identical. They did something to us, Nina says. Something permanent. We're connected, networked, and now something is activating that network. On February 15th, Evan has a different dream, more specific. He sees a date, February 28th, 2025. He sees a location, Los Angeles International Airport. He sees an event, Terminal 4, explosion, 3:17 p.m. He wakes up, shaking. He writes it down. Then he checks the Reddit forum. 17 people have posted the exact same prediction. February 28th arrives. Evan spends the entire day watching news feeds, his heart in his throat. At 3:15 Pacific time, CNN breaks into regular programming. We're receiving reports of an incident at Los Angeles International Airport. Details are still emerging, but there appears to have been an explosion in Terminal 4. Emergency services are responding. We'll bring you more information as it becomes available. Evan stares at the screen, his entire body is numb. He was right. They were all right. On March 3rd, Evan receives another email from Thomas Kessler. Subject line: Phase 2 was never cancelled. The attachment is a document dated December 2024. 53 pages. Classified. Title: Gate X. Next Generation Cognitive Asset Integration. Evan reads it. His hands tremble. The document describes a new program, not a continuation of the original GATE initiative. Something bigger, coordinated across multiple agencies: DARPA, NSA, DIA, even private contractors. The goal: create a distributed intelligence network using human beings with enhanced predictive cognition, not individual operatives, a hive mind, and the test subjects, the children from the original GATE cohorts, now adults, their brains still wired with the neural modifications implanted decades ago. The activation date, January 1st, 2025. Evan scrolls to the final page. There's a list: names, addresses, biometric data. 32 names. The original Cohort 7 from 1998. 18 are still alive, all monitored, all activated, and at the bottom of the page, a new section: GateX Phase 1 Intake. Projected cohort, 2,847 subjects. A list of schools, a list of children, hundreds of them, flagged through modern standardized testing, identified for advanced cognitive assessment. The program never ended. It evolved. Evan drives to Sycamore Hills Elementary on a Wednesday morning. The school looks the same. The playground, the flagpole, the portable classroom behind the chain-link fence. He parks across the street and watches. At 9:15 a.m, a woman in a grey blazer walks out of the main building. She's carrying a clipboard, mid-30s, professional, cold. She enters a classroom. 10 minutes later, she emerges with a child, a boy, maybe 8 years old, dark hair, glasses. He's carrying a folder. They walk toward the portable classroom. Evan gets out of his car. He crosses the street. He's not sure what he's going to do. He just knows he has to see. The boy is holding his folder loosely. As he passes Evan, the folder slips from his hands. Papers scatter across the sidewalk. Evan bends down to help. He picks up one of the sheets. At the top, in red ink, a triangle inside a circle. The exact same symbol from 26 years ago. The boy looks at him. His eyes are brown, serious, older than they should be. "Thank you," the boy says quietly. Evan hands him the paper. He wants to say something, warn him, tell him to run, anything. But what can he say? "Be careful," Evan finally manages. The boy doesn't respond. He just turns and walks toward the portable classroom. The door opens automatically as he approaches. He steps inside. The door closes. Evan stands there, frozen, watching. And somewhere, far away, in a facility buried beneath concrete and secrecy, buried under a desert with 3 white radar domes gleaming in the sun, a system activates. Data streams in. Neural patterns synchronize. Predictions are calculated. The future is being written. One child at a time. Evan, Nina, and Thomas Kessler compile everything. Decades of documents. Testimonies from 53 former GATE students. Leaked footage. Neurological scans. Financial records showing money flowing from intelligence agencies to school districts. They bring it to journalists. The New York Times. Washington Post. ProPublica. On April 23rd, 2025, the story breaks. Secret government program use schools to identify and develop children with psychic abilities. The response is explosive. Congressional hearings are called. The Department of Education issues a statement denying any involvement. DARPA releases a press release calling the allegations unfounded conspiracy theories based on misinterpreted educational research. Dr. Marjorie Leland cannot be located. Her last known address is abandoned. Her professional credentials have been scrubbed from university databases. Parents pull their children from gifted programs nationwide. Lawsuits are filed, hundreds of them. Former cohort members come forward, sharing their experiences, demanding accountability. The Oversight Committee launches an investigation, but the evidence keeps disappearing. Documents are lost. Witnesses recant. Facilities are demolished. The paper trail evaporates. Within 6 months, the story fades from headlines. Too complex, too conspiratorial, too easy to dismiss. 2 years later. March 2027. Evan is sitting in his apartment in San Diego when he receives a package. No return address. Inside, a USB drive. He plugs it into his computer. A single file. Video footage dated February 2027. It shows a classroom. Children sitting in a circle. White walls. Tinted windows. The teacher is young, male. Wire-rimmed glasses. He's not Mr. Calloway, but he stands the same way. Talks the same way. You're here because you're different, the teacher says. Not better, different. The children listen. One of them is the boy from Sycamore Hills Elementary. The boy who dropped his folder. He's drawing something on a piece of paper. Evan zooms in on the video. The drawing shows a desert. 3 radar domes, a cluster of buildings. The exact same image Evan drew when he was 9 years old. The video ends. Evan stares at the black screen. Then he picks up his phone and calls Nina. They're still doing it, he says. I know, Nina replies. I've been tracking the new cohorts. They're calling it something different now. Advanced Cognitive Development Initiative. But it's the same program, same exercises, same facilities. How many children? At least 3,000. Possibly more. Evan closes his eyes. We have to stop them. We tried. The story came out. Nothing changed. So what do? Nina is silent for a long time. Then, we warn them. The children. We find them. We tell them what's happening. We give them a choice we never had. And if they don't believe us, then at least they'll know to be afraid. March 2028. A child sits in a portable classroom. 9 years old, brown eyes, nervous hands. A teacher stands at the front of the room. We're going to do an exercise, the teacher says. I want you to close your eyes and draw a place you've never been. The child closes their eyes. An image forms, a desert, buildings, radar domes. But before the child opens their eyes, before they put pencil to paper, their phone vibrates. A text message from an unknown number. Whatever they tell you to draw, don't draw it. Whatever they tell you to predict, say you don't know. Whatever they tell you you're capable of, pretend you're not. You're not different. You're not special. You're just a kid. Remember that. Stay a kid as long as you can. Don't let them take that from you. Someone who got out the child deletes the message, opens their eyes, picks up the pencil, and draws a house, a tree, a sun, a dog. Normal things, safe things, things that 9-year-olds draw. The teacher walks by, glances at the drawing, moves on without comment. The child exhales. Outside, across the street, Evan sits in his car, watching, waiting. He sends the same message to 17 other children, 17 names on a list he obtained through channels he'll never disclose. Most won't listen. Most will draw the facility. Most will demonstrate the abilities. Most will be flagged. But maybe one will listen. Maybe one will hide what they can do. Maybe one will escape. And that's enough. Because the program will continue. It always continues. New names, new cover stories, new facilities. But so will the resistance. One child at a time. One warning at a time. one person who got out, trying to save the next generation from being weaponized. The war for these children's minds isn't over, it's just beginning.